Chapter 1282. The special ability of the sea flower lay in the tentacles that stretched out from the void and the leeches that could split. In addition to these, there were also the shrimp eggs that tried to parasitize it. When the Gemini Divine Technique appeared, these abilities basically couldn't get within 100 meters of Han Fei. In just an instant, they were frozen. As Han Fei's black mist rolled, they were directly shattered into pieces. After all, no matter how strong the sea flower was, it couldn't compare to the power of a natural treasure. The current Whitey was a walking ice machine. Wherever it went, it would freeze. If Han Fei weren't its master, he would have been frozen too. However, creatures that had reached the level of the sea flower were already extremely spiritual. A creature that could survive in a place like the demon ceiling tower would have been killed long ago if it didn't have some ability. Then Han Fei saw that the void tentacle that stretched out again had a skeleton hanging on it. It was not a complete skeleton, but the corpse of a half-mermaid. This skeleton, like a marionette, was controlled by the tentacles. The corpse, which was in the state of a marionette, directly spewed out a pillar of fire from its mouth. The pillar of fire was extremely hot, accompanied by dazzling light, like a ray of fire, almost comparable to the impact of the white sun essence fire. This was another major feature of the sea flower. It could inherit the power of other creatures to a certain extent. But now, how could it be inherited? It was clearly fighting with someone else's body. The guy controlled by the sea flower should be extraordinary. Even after its death, the power of flames released was so pure and hot. However, the sea flower didn't know that what little White swallowed was a natural treasure, which couldn't be compared to ordinary fire elements. Han Fei, who had turned into a white mist, rolled up a cone-shaped tentacle and rushed straight at the fire element. But unexpectedly, the fire element began to collapse halfway. It seemed fierce, but in fact, when it was 10 meters away from Han Fei, it completely disintegrated, not even causing a spark. The flower of the sea froze for a moment and let one of her tentacles be frozen into pieces by Han Fei. In the next moment, hundreds of tentacles reached out from the void. There was a creature hanging on each tentacle, including an octopus, a six-fingered coral, a green toad, as well as colorful sea urchins, lobsters, and conches. Among them, there were 6 half-mermaids, 1 mermaid, and 1 humanoid like Yuan Dao. That should be an Atlantean. Realizing Han Fei's power, the flower of the sea seemed to have paid a great price. She thought to herself, I have hundreds of creatures and at least 100 techniques here. Can none of them cure you? Han Fei was rather stunned when so many creatures came out. He wondered how many creatures the sea flower had killed in the past. Although surprised, he didn't panic at all. Although it had inherited the power of other living beings, those other living beings had long since perished. The flower of the sea would definitely not be able to unleash its full strength. Based on Han Fei's understanding of power, if the half-mermaid were still alive, it would at least be an advanced Dao-seeking creature. Puff! Han Fei directly controlled his 2 bodies to fully expand, turning from 2 clouds of smoke into 2 clouds of smoke. Although the black fog spread out, it didn't cover any creatures. Therefore, it didn't suppress the various attacks of these creatures at the first moment. However, the white fog was different. A large expanse of fog drifted out, and most of the attack energy began to weaken within 100 meters of the white fog. Most of the attacks that could break into the white fog were sword lights, blades, and so on. However, even Han Fei didn't expect that there were some special methods in this attack. A spear-like thing pierced through the space and drew a long space crack. But even such a spear was wrapped and swallowed by the black fog. Han Fei was also very surprised. The fused fog seemed to have very good teeth. It seemed to be able to eat anything. However, this devouring power wasn't without its flaws. It seemed to shorten the time of his transformation. In other words, the more attacks he received, the stronger the power, the shorter the time for Han Fei to use the Gemini Divine Technique. However, Han Fei didn't mind if it was shortened a little. The Gemini Divine Technique could last for half an hour when fighting with a semi-venerable puppet, let alone a battle of this level. Nearly half of the 100 or so tentacles disintegrated in an instant. Under the baptism of the black and white fog, they were damaged again and again, and in just a moment, there were only about 20 tentacles left, which looked very shabby. After all, Han Fei was not familiar with the Gemini divine technique, so he wanted to practice it. The black and white clouds of fog turned into human shapes. The black Han Fei didn't attack directly but tried to approach and kill them. The normal Han Fei raised his hands and summoned a large number of ice spears. The spears shot out with his mind. However, this kind of spear that left his body was purely a summon of power and didn't have particularly strong attack power. At this time, Han Fei also used the invincible fist mark. The art of invincibility actually had a layer of frost effect. The fierce battle lasted for a long time. The flowers of the sea seemed to realize that neither their own power nor the power they manipulated could shake Han Fei. This made the flowers of the sea panic. Spiritual power vibrated in the water. I'll let you go. Let's stay out of each other's way, okay? Han Fei didn't expect that this thing actually had a consciousness. It could even communicate with him. Humph. Han Fei snorted and ignored it. After all, at this time, the black Han Fei had lurked not far from the side of the giant flower of the sea without attacking. You're already close to it, and you just want to make peace. Isn't it too late? How could Han Fei bear it? The black Han Fei was still approaching. However, all the attention of the flowers of the sea seemed to be focused on the normal Han Fei and didn't notice this black figure. Han Fei was very careful not to cause fluctuations in the airflow. He found that although the flowers of the sea were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws, their torso was so tall and looked like a big tree. In fact, it was just a big flower. Looking from above, there was a fruit hidden in the stamen of the flower in the center. If he wasn't wrong, it should be some kind of void fruit. Seeing this, in order to attract the attention of the flowers of the sea, the white Han Fei immediately shouted, "You want me not to attack? Then you have to give me a reason not to attack. Otherwise, die." Han Fei hadn't spoken before. At this moment, the flowers of the sea saw that Han Fei had really stopped attacking and was still talking to her in a negotiating tone. Immediately, she also stopped attacking. To be honest, the flowers of the sea had never been reasonable with anyone in her life, but now she was forced to reason with Han Fei. Han Fei said, "Let me ask you first, how does this place lead to the lower level?" Immediately, the flowers of the sea said excitedly, "From here, it's less than 600 kilometers. Just go through a channel guarded by a half-skeleton. I can help you talk to the half-skeleton and open the channel." Han Fei thought to himself, this is just the third level. Even if I don't use anything, I can still break through it. Han Fei continued, "Second, tell me, do you know where there are powerful lotus demonic plants?" Huh? The flowers of the sea seemed to have dozens of mouths and were talking at the same time. "No, there are only 2 demonic plants here, me and the 6-fingered coral, and no other demonic plants." Han Fei asked, "You don't know the other levels below, do you?" The flowers of the sea's voice shook. "I've never left this place. I only know that there should be other spaces above and below me. In the past, most of the living beings on this layer of ours went to other places down there through that tunnel." Han Fei didn't expect to get any accurate answers from the flowers of the sea. What level was the water fairy? What level was the flowers of the sea? Han Fei was really not interested in this third level, so he didn't want to continue talking with the flowers of the sea, so he shouted, "Do it!" Sacrificing punch, draw technique, the white Han Fei punched at the flowers of the sea. The flowers of the sea immediately panicked. "You and I have no grudge against each other. Why do you have to fight me to the death? Why did you sneak attack me?" The flowers of the sea found that in the center of the stamen, a streak of sword chi swept across in an instant. In the next moment, her fruit was gone. It had actually been plucked by something. The flowers of the sea exclaimed, "Is this companion spirit?" Puff, puff, Puff after only 3 seconds, Snowmorn, together with the white Han Fei, chopped the void tentacles of the flowers of the sea into pieces. Han Fei grinned. You don't know anything. What's the use of you? If you want to prove your usefulness, open your soul and let me have a look at it. Otherwise, you can go to hell. The flowers of the sea had no choice. God knew why Han Fei was so strong. Even with its realm, it couldn't figure it out. For countless years, it had never met an opponent like Han Fei. To be honest, Han Fei didn't seem strong at all. How did he become so powerful the moment he made a move? At this moment, Han Fei asked to see its soul. Although the flowers of the sea were horrified, they still agreed. After all, it was a demonic plant. If it didn't work, it could split its tentacles and escape into the void to be reborn. The flowers of the sea agreed. Okay. Han Fei smiled. Collect. The flowers of the sea. As a matter of fact, the flower of the sea was still thinking with a dumbfounded expression, what does accept mean? However, in the next moment, it didn't know anything. Chapter 1283. The function of the demon purification pot seemed to have no limit at all. The number of contractual spiritual beasts it could fuse with seemed to be related to the number of vines in the demon purification pot. This sea flower was indeed very strong. If it weren't for Han Fei's special means, it would have been impossible for him to win so easily. Of course, it was better to keep such a creature. At this moment, Han Fei glanced at the void fruit in his hand. In his eyes, information emerged. Name a void fruit. Introduction, a kind of spatial path understanding fruit. All the laws of the sea flower's life are gathered in this fruit. Eating it can help you understand the way of space, which is extremely rare. Level a heaven level quality, high quality, contains spiritual energy greater than 101,000 points. Effect, the understanding of space depends on the devourer's own opportunities. Seeing this fruit had such a magical effect, Han Fei's eyes widened. In this vast sea, there might be a lot of spiritual fruits, but there weren't many with special quality and magical effects. Although most of the anti-poison fruits were precious, they paled in comparison to the so-called space element's spiritual fruit. One had to know that this fruit had the potential to create a genius. The behemoth-like sea flower was sucked into the world in the pot by the demon purification pot. Han Fei's vision suddenly widened, and his eyes lit up. The demon purification pot absorbed the sea flower's body, and the countless corpse puppets killed by the sea flower were not sucked into the demon purification pot. So, Han Fei found a big pit under the body of the sea flower. In that big pit, there were more than 200 corpses of various colors. Han Fei's heart was filled with excitement. Then, he felt a little regretful. It was a pity that the great puppet technique could only be refined when the body hadn't decayed and the soul hadn't completely dissipated. How long had it been since these living beings had perished? Did he want to refine them into puppets? It would be very difficult. Han Fei couldn't help wondering if there was a way to refine these creatures with the puppet-raising technique. This idea was rejected by Han Fei as soon as it came to his mind. Now was not the right time. He couldn't fully trust the old turtle yet. In the future, when he grew stronger and could easily pinch Gui Sanqing to death, he could deduce and use the puppet-raising spell and the soul-searching spell. However, even though there were many corpses here, there weren't many who could still fight. Although Han Fei couldn't refine them into puppets, he could use the soul-splitting technique. As long as he split a strand of his divine soul, he would be able to control these creatures. However, there wasn't much point in doing so. He could control their broken bodies, but his combat power would not be very high. Han Fei landed and waved his hand, collecting half of the wreckage into Forge the Universe. These living beings were at the Tao-seeking realm, after all. Any one of them would be divine weapon-grade materials in terms of body. The remaining portion was indeed broken and could not be used to refine weapons. Han Fei keenly discovered that there were as many as a dozen flood dragon bones here. Seeing this scene, Han Fei's eyes lit up again. Since there were flood dragon bones, it meant that there should be a lot of flood dragons and pythons here. As for the half-human that the flower of the sea mentioned, when Han Fei first heard of this creature, he thought that it was a human snake or a snake spirit. Its upper body was that of a human and its lower body was that of a snake. Otherwise, how could it be called a half-human? Seeing that Han Fei was safe, the old turtle said lightly, "It seems that this demon sealing tower is indeed extraordinary. Enemies in the same realm are extremely difficult to deal with. Do you want to eat this fruit now?" The two Han Feis dissipated at the same time. Han Fei turned back into himself, and little black and little white hovered around him. With a thought, Yuan Dao appeared. Han Fei nodded. "Yes, of course. The more special creatures here, the more dangerous it is, and the more opportunities there are. As soon as I came in, I met creatures like the six-fingered coral and the flower of the sea. Since they can live here for so long, eating some of their power may help them adapt to the environment here better." The old turtle pondered. "That's good. However, I'm a little uneasy. In this so-called demon sealing tower, the secrets of heaven are chaotic. I can't divine anything." Reminded by the old turtle, Han Fei couldn't help but calculate. Sure enough, he couldn't sense anything. The old turtle said disdainfully, "I don't know how you learned the art of divination at such a young age. But what realm are you in? Even I can't divine anything. How can you do it?" Han Fei curled his lips. "I hope when I become a king, you can still be as proud as you are now." Asking Yuan Dao to protect him, Han Fei quickly sat cross-legged. "Old Yuan, let me see how dangerous this place is and cultivate here. Let's see how many creatures will come here." The old turtle nodded. "Okay." He stuffed the void fruit into his mouth, and like sweet water as smooth as honey, it flowed directly into his body. Han Fei felt a shock in his head and felt as if he had entered a dream. It was as if countless mirrors had appeared all around him. Han Fei, who was in a slightly confused state, looked around and found that he was everywhere. Although he was a little confused, Han Fei didn't lose his mind, so he didn't directly drill into the mirrors. Han Fei gently pointed his finger, and a knife light pierced into a mirror. At the moment when the knife light left his body and entered the mirror, Han Fei suddenly had a strange feeling. Han Fei felt that it could go wherever he wanted it to go. Han Fei immediately looked back and thought of something. He saw that the knife light that he had just launched in front of him appeared behind him. Han Fei suddenly had an epiphany. He, who had learned the closed distance technique, might not be called the close distance technique, but distance reduction. The way to shrink the earth into an inch was to find a target point and cause the space there to tremble. As long as the vibration was at the same frequency as himself, he could ignore the space and directly cross it. But at this moment, countless nodes appeared in Han Fei's mind. It seemed that as long as his soul was shrouded, he could go to many places. Han Fei even felt that he could step into the void and directly leave the real world. This was a bit similar to the time travel technique. In the outside world, Han Fei had been sitting cross-legged for an hour. In the beginning, there were no creatures attacking him. However, just after an hour, he saw a yellow light jump over. It was none other than the six-fingered coral. Not only the six-fingered coral, but also dozens of whip shadows swept over. Those whip shadows looked like shadows of light. The moment they appeared, they quickly reached back. When these whip shadows appeared again, they no longer probed but directly rushed at Han Fei. However, at this moment, Yuan Dao took action. With the strength of a semi-venerable, he smashed the six-fingered coral that came to probe and grabbed a long whip with one hand. As Yuan Dao pulled hard, the long whip was straightened by a terrifying force. A black strange fish was broken through the void and pulled back. The shape of this creature was extremely strange. It had a single nose sticking out of its head. On the nose, there was a long whip countless times longer than its body. At this moment, Han Fei suddenly opened his eyes, only to see that the strange fish was rushing towards him. Ha! A giant thorn-horn snakehead. The first thought in Han Fei's mind was that this guy in front of him was very similar to a deep-sea fish named snakehead that he had seen before. And it was an extremely rare thorn-horn snakehead. Swish! Han Fei moved slightly and appeared next to the giant snakehead. Information emerged in his eyes. Name: a dragon whisker devourer. Introduction: a dragon whisker devourer, with a little dragon bloodline, has the power of charm and illusion. It can make creatures enter its stomach unknowingly and make it difficult for them to get out. Its long whip has a very strong perception ability. It is extremely tough and sharp and can break through the void. Level a 77. Quality: a legendary law enforcement charm whip. It contains spiritual energy of 15,026 points. Effect: an edible collectible charm whisker. Remarks: there is another world in the stomach of the dragon whisker devourer, which has a very strong ability to confuse people. When he saw the dragon whisker devourer, Han Fei directly ignored the charm technique. But the dragon bloodline and the long whip were very tough. This sentence deeply attracted Han Fei. His void lines should have been upgraded a long time ago. It wasn't easy for him to get 3 Trilight blazing cold lobster veins, but so far, he hadn't met a Dao-seeking state demon that could be used to refine the void lines. Unexpectedly, he met one in this demon subduing tower. Even Yuan Dao couldn't break its long whisker. It was obvious how tough it was. Han Fei was excited. This is a treasure land. This is a fucking peerless treasure land. For ordinary people, the demon subduing tower was a dangerous place. However, for Han Fei, this was a peerless treasure land. As soon as he came in, he swallowed the void fruit, picked up a pile of divine weapon materials, and encountered the dragon whisker devourer. He was going to upgrade himself. The old turtle said, "How is the effect of the fruit?" Han Fei smiled. "Excellent." Chapter 1284. What Han Fei said was really good. If it was said that he had been pretending to use the closed distance technique before, then he had really comprehended it now. The so-called closed distance could be used to shorten the distance or shorten the time. Shortening the time was actually an act of deceiving oneself. In fact, the distance covered didn't change. And shortening the distance was like a teleportation state, just like the infinite flickering ability of the phantom glass wings. That was the power to cross space. At this moment, Han Fei's strength had grown so much, but he was a little restrained in using combat skills. Thanks to this void spirit fruit, Han Fei sensed that there were some space nodes scattered in the surrounding space. If he found the right space node, he could easily achieve the strange powers of flickering, shrinking the distance into an inch, 1,000 kilometers away, and space distortion. This kind of mastery of space power made Han Fei curious about the star teleportation technique. It was because he understood the nodes in space that he knew that the so-called space could actually be sealed. A strong master could forcibly seal a space with great means. In other words, a certain powerful force could imprison some space nodes and make them impossible to break. However, the star teleportation technique was not one of them. The star teleportation technique could even break the space nodes, as if he had opened a space taboo and forcibly destroyed a part of space. Although there had been people who could seal his star teleportation technique. However, that was purely because the other party was much stronger than him. If the two of them were in the same realm, the other party couldn't stop him at all. At this moment, Han Fei saw a light light up on the head of the dragon beard devourer. At that moment, he seemed to have fallen into an illusion. In the illusion, there was a huge fish head, opening its big mouth and trying to swallow him. God's stunning spike. As soon as he stabbed the spear, the illusion big fish in front of him shattered like glass. And a big mouth was trying to swallow him. However, at this moment, the dragon beard devourer's eyes were red, as if it had been stabbed by his God-stunning spike. However, the other party's reaction speed was not slow. After all, as an advanced Dao-seeking state creature, it wouldn't be directly killed by Han Fei's God-stunning spike. In that case, the creatures raised by the demon-suppressing tower would be too worthless. Han Fei's fist flashed and he punched out. However, he only felt his mind tremble slightly. When he came back to his senses, he realized that he had hit the wrong spot. Rip! Only a sawtooth-like noise could be heard. The dragon whisker devourer appeared 100 meters away and tried to pull its long whisker out of Yu Wendao's hand. However, it still underestimated the power of a half-martial highness. Han Fei got the gist of it. Just now, when he punched out, the dragon whisker devourer's head turned red once. It must have confused him at that moment. Han Fei's expression was unfriendly. He roared and stepped on the dragon beard devourer, activating the 100-beast soul-suppressing roar. Bang, bang, 2 explosions rang out, and the dragon whisker devourer's eyeballs exploded from the impact. Clang Puchi. Han Fei forcibly cut off the long whiskers of the dragon whisker devourer. Immediately afterward, he used the sword-drawing technique to cut off his body. An advanced Dao-seeking state creature was already extremely powerful, but it was still cut off by Han Fei with 2 slashes. The old turtle said leisurely, "Your reaction speed is not slow. However, it's still not enough. At the moment when you were confused, if the other party had chosen to attack instead of fleeing, you would have been hit. If you encountered a supreme master, he would have seized this moment of opportunity. After all, your Taoist heart is not strong enough." Han Fei frowned. Taoist heart? The old turtle said, "The Taoist heart may be a bit mysterious. However, if your Taoist heart is strong, your will be strong. Although the power of your soul can resist a lot of confusion and illusions, the soul is not omnipotent. At least, it can't compare to the Taoist heart. When you comprehend your own path in the future, you will know that the Taoist heart is countless times stronger than the soul." Han Fei was puzzled. Taoist heart? Why haven't I heard of it before? The old turtle snorted and said, "Why don't you take a look at how remote this part of the sea you are in? In fact, in my era, even the weak had mostly begun to cultivate the Taoist heart." Han Fei was surprised. What is the Taoist heart? The old turtle explained, "The Taoist heart is a cultivator's pursuit of the great Tao in his heart. Or, it's for the supreme heart to become stronger. On the path of cultivation, all living beings wither. It's not easy for you to walk a path alone. Some people give up halfway, and some look around blankly. These are all manifestations of the lack of a Taoist heart. You have conceived the ancient seed. If you stick to that path, your Taoist heart will be stable in the future. Now, your ancient seed has collapsed and you haven't comprehended your own great Tao, so your Taoist heart is temporarily unstable." Han Fei was stunned. "Why do I have a Taoist heart?" The old turtle said, "Think about it. What kind of environment were you in when you harvested that ancient seed? What were you pursuing?" Han Fei's heart skipped a beat. The seed was born in the abyssal chasm in the level 3 fishery, in the opportunity left to him by Ren Tianfei. As for the environment, Han Fei suddenly perked up. When he was in the level 3 fishery, he didn't have any distracting thoughts. All his purposes were mainly to become stronger, for revenge, and simply to find the opportunity left by Ren Tianfei. Therefore, when he was in the level 3 fishery, his most enthusiastic thing was to explore secret realms and do everything possible to become stronger. And at this moment, it seemed that he was trying to save the water fairy. However, when he came to the Shuemu heaven, he didn't know that the water fairy was still alive. Therefore, saving the water fairy was not his Tao, but something that he needed to do in the near future. So, what was the purpose of him coming to the Shuemu heaven to transcend the heavenly tribulation? Han Fei thought it was to become a king. However, after what the old turtle said just now, Han Fei suddenly realized that it didn't seem to be like that. It was for the war 3 years later. That war put too much pressure on him. The Immortal Palace put too much pressure on him. The road to becoming a king also put too much pressure on him. Everyone's expectations put too much pressure on him. At this moment, Han Fei's body stiffened and his expression became solemn. Yes, in fact, when he competed for the sea-quelling painting, learned about the 36 immortal palaces, and learned some secrets about this world, he had already felt pressure. It was different from Shiman Linglan in the Age of Doom. Shiman Linglan was born in a big clan in that era. After being expelled from the big clan, revenge was the Tao. However, the Tao of revenge was too narrow. In the end, Shiman Linglan embarked on the road of great love. And was his Tao to become a king? Was it for the battle 3 years later? The answer was obviously not. However, if he really went this way, his future would only be limited. At this moment, Han Fei really wanted to thank the old turtle. In the past, he felt that the saying, listening to a wise man is better than studying for 10 years, was too exaggerated. However, it wasn't until just now that Han Fei came back to his senses in surprise. Damn it, listening to a wise man is better than studying for 10 years. It's better than cultivating for 10 years. Didn't the water fairy need to recultivate because she had taken the wrong Tao? Wow! Han Fei took a breath. He had to correct his mistakes. At this moment, Han Fei deeply realized that he was wrong in his thinking. What exactly had he been doing these years? Transcending the heavenly tribulation, pretending to be the fish dragon king, looking for the water fairy, these were just the process. And the state of mind was his biggest problem. The spiritual energy around Han Fei suddenly gathered, and the power from all directions converged. The old turtle took a look. Fuck, did this brat have an epiphany? Why did he have an epiphany at this time? The old turtle was speechless. If you want an epiphany, go into your gourd world. Why did he suddenly have an epiphany? However, Han Fei had already entered the state of epiphany, and spiritual energy was gathering crazily. Only Yuan Dao, Little Black, and Little White, 2 creatures who had just entered the sea spirit state, were not enough. The old turtle couldn't help but curse, why did I have to suffer so much? It wasn't easy for him to save up a little bit of life force, but why did he have to encounter this fool? Epiphany doesn't matter where it is. At this moment, Han Fei was in a complicated mood and didn't realize that he was in an epiphany. In Forge the Universe, the spiritual energy and energy of the sea spirit burst out, which stunned the fish dragon king. What is Han Fei doing now? At this moment, Han Fei was very upset. What is my path? At first, it was for treasure hunting. Later, in order to protect himself, he needed to keep becoming stronger. After that, he was a little immersed in the thrill of treasure hunting and becoming stronger, chasing after Ren Tianfei's treasure, wanting to see the world and yearning for the infinite ocean. In Luo Xiaobai's words, he simply wanted to become stronger. Now, Han Fei found that whether it was the war 3 years later, or King Cheng, or the Yinyang Palace, or the story of old Han and his mother, they were actually not his pursuits. He had always been in the game. No matter how smooth things were or how many hardships he had experienced, he couldn't surpass them. Because he was following their plan, and even he instinctively thought that it was right to follow their plan. No. My goal is the infinite ocean, the vast and boundless sea. Xia Shaochan is waiting for me, the heavenly desolate city is waiting for me. The gods have fallen, the beast kings have gone east, and history has become a mystery. My path is to walk, to keep walking forward. Chapter 1285. Kacha. Han Fei stood proudly in the air and unknowingly made a breakthrough. His strength directly crossed the level of a junior explorer and reached the level of an intermediate explorer. The old turtle was dumbfounded. What kind of speed is this? How long has it been since he passed the tribulation? He actually broke through to the level of an intermediate explorer after an epiphany? Not only that, the spiritual energy in Forge the Universe was still being consumed crazily. Thousands of spiritual fruits exploded and various kinds of power poured in, but Han Fei's breakthrough didn't stop. However, the outside world had become a sea of blood and corpses. Yuan Dao was on a killing spree. His palms swept across the sea, poisons escaped from his body, dazzling golden light, gravity suppression, and awe-inspiring knife light. The main reason was that Yuan Dao had mastered too many Daos. In the eyes of the old turtle, he was just a weakling. However, in the eyes of these Dao-seeking state monsters, Yuan Dao was simply a freak. What Han Fei didn't know was that the reason why Yuan Dao wanted to come to the royal city was actually for the royal city's forbidden area. He was confident that he had many means and was very strong. Maybe he could encounter an opportunity in the royal city. However, Yuan Dao never expected that he would enter the royal city's forbidden area as a puppet. Yuan Dao was on a killing spree, and so was the old turtle. At this moment, black fog filled the air, and many strange creatures rushed into the black fog and never came out again. In this black fog, Little White was forcibly suppressed by the old turtle. The main reason was that Little Black and Little White's realms were too low. Even if they had connate Taoist aptitudes, so what? Even connate Taoist aptitudes couldn't fight the enemy across a major realm or multiple minor realms. If Han Fei woke up and saw that his precious spiritual beasts were beaten to death, he would definitely blame himself. This kid would definitely fight him to the death for these two fishes. Little White was captured, and Little Black was attacking. How could he allow a creature to devour Han Fei? Little Black's big mouth, whether he could bite Han Fei or not, he would bite him first. Within a kilometer around Han Fei, there was a lot of cracking sounds. Sparks flew everywhere, which were basically caused by Little Black's bite. The attacks mainly came from two sides. On one side were the six-fingered corals. They seemed to have discovered that the flower of the sea had fallen and were charging over without any fear. A group of corals could actually leave the place where they grew and drift in the water. Who would believe that? However, the six-fingered coral was stopped by the old tortoise alone. All the yellow light shot into the black mist, but it didn't even cause a splash. The insect fluid that could corrode one's life force and divine soul was directly devoured by the black mist, causing it to wither instantly. On the other side, dozens of dragon beard devourers attacked. Just now, one of their companions had perished, so they were somewhat uncertain and didn't dare to act rashly. But at this moment, Han Fei was making a breakthrough. The spiritual essence and energy gathered here, and large amounts of creatures were surging over. It could be said that a storm was brewing, so how could they fall behind? Apart from the dragon whisker devourers, there was also a large shell covered in anemone-like tentacles pushing the water over. The soul of the jellyfish flashed with electric arcs, and a huge flower was burning with flames. Hundreds of living beings were gathering. And on Han Fei's side, there were actually only two combatants. If one had to describe them, Yuan Dao was at most at the peak of Dao seeking, while the old tortoise was half a venerable. Therefore, the old tortoise wrapped Han Fei in the black mist. Even so, the old tortoise could only devour the vitality of these creatures at most. However, if some creatures entered the black mist and directly attacked Han Fei, the old tortoise couldn't directly stop them. He could only control that area and make the absorption of vitality even more crazy. And the black mist, in the final analysis, was also a kind of energy. When the old tortoise defeated the opponent, it actually consumed a lot of energy. Besides, as a divine soul, he swallowed vitality only to prolong his life. The divine soul was the key to the old tortoise's survival. And now the battle was all about the divine soul. Therefore, although it seemed that the old tortoise was almost invincible, shrouded in the black mist, the vitality of all living beings was being devoured. However, only the old tortoise knew that he didn't make any gains. He did gain some vitality, but a lot of divine soul power was used up. Therefore, after the old tortoise saw that Han Fei had become an intermediate explorer, he directly began to call for help. He felt that it was not good to make too many breakthroughs at once. The more talented Han Fei was, the more accumulation and strength he needed. Therefore, the old tortoise growled, "Han Fei, boy, wake up, wake up, wake up," and at this moment, Han Fei was immersed in his beautiful vision. He was very excited. At this moment, he vaguely discovered his own path. It was a kind of exploration, a kind of seeking knowledge, a kind of road that he came here to seek happiness and freedom. To become stronger was to see the world. To cultivate was to see the world. Even though he was already very strong, when he looked at this world, he still felt like a passerby. That kind of feeling was like the arrogance of one's heart that was unyielding even though the heavens and earth were shaking. This kind of mood made Han Fei metamorphose. His meridians were emitting a strange light, and his blood was boiling. In Han Fei's dantian, a sesame-sized seed was born. When this seed was born, the old tortoise was dumbfounded. Wow! Another kind? It's a little small, but this kid actually gave birth to another kind? Isn't such natural talent a little too terrifying? At the moment when Han Fei was having an epiphany, far away in the yin-yang heaven, in a secret realm, Han Guanshu suddenly opened his eyes, pinched his fingers, and his face became solemn. Why did this brat jump out of the chess game now? Han Guanshu quickly pinched his fingers again, and the sky and earth changed colors. After a full 15 minutes, he slowly breathed a sigh of relief. Phew! Fortunately, he hasn't completely jumped out. Fortunately. Han Guanshu couldn't help but be a little curious. Isn't it just asking Han Fei to go to the waterwood heaven for a tribulation? What's going on? Are you going to break my chessboard? Apart from Han Guanshu's side, in a distant unknown place, a woman was standing on a cliff. Under her feet was the bright moon, as if she were standing on the stars. The woman raised her head, looked at the stars in the sky, and her eyes flickered slightly. My son has entered the Tao. But why have I never seen this Tao before? Han Fei didn't know how his epiphany would affect him this time. All in all, he felt that his condition was incomparably good. Of course, except for the noisy shouts in his ears. Wake up, wake up, wake up, Han Fei was very disdainful at first. But the next moment, he suddenly woke up. Damn it, wasn't I fighting in the demon-suppressing tower? Why did I suddenly feel emotional about my life? Suddenly, Han Fei's consciousness returned to reality. When he opened his eyes and took a closer look, there was already a battle in front of him. Black fog swept across, and many creatures were forcibly held by the old turtle, their vitality fading away. The old turtle roared, "You brat, you still know how to wake up? It's all up to you. In this battle, my soul power has been damaged again, and I can no longer fight." Originally, Han Fei wanted to thank the old turtle, thinking, if it weren't for this old guy's words, I wouldn't have been able to determine my own path until now. As for what the old turtle said about his soul being damaged, Han Fei didn't believe it at all. The reason why he didn't believe it was that the old turtle, as a dignified emperor, wouldn't hurt himself because of this trivial battle. What was an emperor like? He didn't know yet. However, Han Fei knew very well what a half-king level expert looked like. They were simply inhuman. The sky-dissecting finger was terrifying enough, wasn't it? He felt that that finger could pierce through the sky. However, a half-king level expert could resist it. He had asked before, how many peak-level venerables or half-king level experts could a king-level expert defeat? The old turtle said, 12, easy. It could be seen that a king-level expert should be able to easily destroy a 1,000-star city. Even a king-level expert could do this. What about an emperor? Therefore, Han Fei wouldn't believe that the old turtle was pretending to be weak. However, he was indeed absent-minded just now. Since there was a creature here, let's fight. After getting rid of some of the restrictions, Han Fei found that he was still most passionate about exploration, treasure hunting, becoming stronger, and seeking knowledge. At this moment, he saw the big mussel open its shell, and a large number of tentacles stretched out of its shell, trying to buckle him. Humph! Now, even a seashell dares to make a move against me. Do you think you can do whatever you want now that my garlic sauce is gone? Han Fei stepped into the air, and his figure flickered in the air, appearing directly next to the big mussel. The invincible fist mark bombarded, and with a boom, the big mussel was sent flying. Thud! Kacha! When Han Fei heard the thunderous bombardment, he felt that his strength was a bit wrong. Han Fei immediately looked at his information. In the next moment, Han Fei gasped. What the hell did I do? When did I become an intermediate explorer? In his eyes, information popped up. Owner Han Fei, level greater than 74, Intermediate Explorer, Spiritual Energy, 180,000/180,000, Spiritual Power, 24666/24666, Perception Range greater than 2,160 kilometers, Law Enforcer, Invincible Power greater than 348 waves, First Spiritual Heritage, Unknown, Second Spiritual Heritage, Unawakened, First Spiritual Beast, Twin Yin-Yang Spirit Swallowing Fish, Level, 61, Second Spiritual Beast, Unawakened, Main Art, Sky Stealing Technique, Level 6 of Void Fishing, Venerable Level, Divine Quality. Chapter 1286. When he saw this information, Han Fei was stunned. When the hell did I become an intermediate explorer? His upper limit of spiritual energy suddenly soared to 180,000. His spiritual power had also increased a lot, and his perception range had increased by more than 200 kilometers. And this was when he hadn't cultivated the God-scaring painting. Otherwise, as time went by, it would only get higher. However, he didn't have to ask the old turtle this time. Han Fei soon found that his state was not right. He seemed to be much more relaxed, both physically and mentally. Looking at his dantian, there was a sesame-sized seed that had just been born. Han Fei was a little surprised. I just perceived it for a while. Why do I benefit so much? Is this a Tao seed? At this time, the old turtle thought to himself, what are you still wondering about? I'm the one who's depressed. The old turtle said, physical body, realm, spiritual perception, these are extremely important in cultivation, especially perception. It determines the height of your spiritual realm and the height of your soul. Han Fei looked at his spiritual power, which didn't seem to have increased a lot, but in fact, it had increased by nearly 10%. After reaching the explorer realm, it was already extremely terrifying to be able to increase his strength by 10%. Of course, this was definitely not the limit. Han Fei could clearly sense that as long as he had enough time to cultivate, it shouldn't be a problem for his spiritual power to increase by 20% or even 30%. Unfortunately, what he lacked now was time. Looking at the clamshell that was almost torn apart by his punch, Han Fei grinned, stepped on the ground, and his figure had already appeared a kilometer away. The long beard of a dragon beard devourer, which didn't escape in time, was caught by Han Fei. Chilla, the sword-drawing technique reflected dazzling brilliance on the bottom of the sea. A long whisker was cut off by Han Fei. In addition to those normal creatures, a large number of six-fingered corals were emitting grayish-yellow light. This group of living corals seemed to be fearless of death and wanted to seize territory. However, as soon as the sea flower died, Han Fei's strength was greatly improved, and the six-fingered corals couldn't use their parasitic means at all. In this way, they were directly sucked dry by Han Fei. Yes, sucked dry, sucked out spiritual energy, and cut off vitality. However, there were still many creatures here, and they were basically all advanced Tao-seeking state monsters. Therefore, even if Han Fei went all out, he couldn't kill anyone in an instant. That was not to the extent of it. He saw a one-horned flood dragon with lightning flashing on its horn. Within a radius of several thousand meters, electric currents surged, directly electrocuting a large black fish and causing it to fall to the bottom of the sea. A blue lobster attacked with its pincers, cutting off the flow of the sea. A crack appeared in the space. It seemed to want to kill Han Fei without any hesitation. Roar! All of you, scram! Han Fei's body suddenly expanded. The Beast King art was activated, and the great ape body held the embroidery needle in its hand. Bang bang bang. He allowed the electric sparks to fall on his body. The surface of Han Fei's body and the water around him were exploding. However, Han Fei didn't slow down at all. The 3,000 strikes of the ape and monkey rained down and smashed the giant pincer. Then, Han Fei stepped out and used distance reduction. Xiao Hua aimed at the flood dragon's head and smashed it crazily until the flood dragon's head was forcibly smashed off. Staring at the giant pincer, Han Fei punched again. Under the sacrificing punch, the giant pincer was crushed all the way to the ground. Han Fei's powerful attack killed one and seriously injured the other. Many creatures were surprised to see this. More importantly, the six-fingered coral didn't gain any advantage from Han Fei. It was also because of this blow that the creatures on the third floor of the demon-suppressing tower recognized Han Fei's strength. Therefore, a large number of creatures began to retreat. But Han Fei didn't want to give in. He shouted, "Other creatures can go, but leave the dragon-whiskered fish to me." Like a giant, Han Fei continuously used distance reduction on the bottom of the sea and chased after them frantically. A dragon-whiskered devourer said to him via voice transmission, "We recognize your strength. Why do you keep chasing us?" Han Fei was slightly surprised. "You can talk. Why didn't you say so earlier? In short, I want your long whiskers. Do you want to give them to me, or do you want me to pull them out myself?" Roar. "How dare you talk nonsense when you're new here?" Seeing that Yuan Dao didn't chase them in time, 3 dragon-whiskered devourers turned around quickly. Their long whiskers formed a net, intertwined, and covered Han Fei. However, Han Fei didn't want to fight a protracted battle with them. So, he suddenly appeared next to a dragon-whisker devourer with star transposition. He used the sword-drawing technique, and the infinity water turned into a knife. How could an ordinary Dao-seeking state demon resist the 2 fierce strikes and the sea-quelling bizarre treasures? Swish on the scales of the dragon-whiskered devourers, flames were leaping. Han Fei could even feel the squirming of their body muscles. However, even so, these dragon-whiskered fish failed to resist the attack of the sea-quelling bizarre treasures. In just an instant, the 2 advanced Dao-seeking state demons were almost forcibly chopped in half. They didn't die in one blow because they had stayed in the advanced Dao-seeking state for too long, so their bodies were already very strong. Therefore, they were saved from being cut by Han Fei's sword and knife. However, just when the 2 dragon-whiskered devourers were terrified and were about to burn their blood to escape, they suddenly found that their souls seemed to be entangled. In fact, the cultivation time of these dragon-whiskered fish was much longer than Han Fei. Although Han Fei's soul power was very strong, it wasn't much stronger than these advanced Dao-seeking state demons. Therefore, it was very difficult to control them directly. However, what Han Fei wanted to do was to delay them a little. As for the rest, he would think about it later. The infinity water turned into thousands of knife streams, entangling the 2 dragon-whiskered devourers in it. In an instant, thousands of wounds were cut. In an instant, these 2 advanced Dao-seeking state demons, who should have been extremely powerful, were killed. Seeing Han Fei's ferocity, the other creatures didn't dare to fight anymore. A fish Dao-seeking was obviously stronger than the power on the 3rd floor of the demon-subduing tower. However, because it was a puppet, the demon-subduing tower had no restrictions on it. The creatures who could survive to the present in the demon-subduing tower were not fools. How could a person who could kill the flower of the sea be weak? Even if they attacked him together, they couldn't shake him. Why didn't he run? Right at this moment, a strange perception casually swept past. Han Fei suddenly became alert. Han Fei could clearly know that on the 3rd floor of the demon-subduing tower, the strongest creatures should be advanced Dao-seeking state demons. Because of their different characteristics, those who could survive might have certain abilities. However, they certainly wouldn't be so strong that he couldn't deal with them. However, this perception made Han Fei's heart palpitate. Could it be a giant beast that could compete with him as an advanced Dao-seeking state demon? Then, Han Fei smiled casually. He almost forgot that he was only an intermediate Dao-seeking state demon. Before, he was only an elementary Dao-seeking state demon. Since when did he not take advanced Dao-seeking state creatures seriously? Could it be a legendary creature? Only legendary creatures could give him a sense of danger in this realm. If it was a creature of other levels, unless it reached the semi-venerable level, it wouldn't make him palpitate. Han Fei didn't directly perceive with his soul. At this level, he found that there were too many creatures that could attack the divine soul. He didn't perceive with his soul, but Han Fei snorted and collected dozens of broken bodies. Then he strode and swam in the direction of the danger. "Ha!" The old turtle exclaimed, "It's this kind of creature. Han Fei was puzzled. What? The old turtle said, go and see for yourself. That guy is waiting for you. Han Fei was even more puzzled. Waiting for me? Does it think it can defeat me? Han Fei didn't believe it. In the words of the old turtle, the yin-yang heavens and the waterwood heavens were just barren lands. And he had just had an epiphany. The key to his path was not the path itself, but the way he walked. If he couldn't even walk through this barren land and defeat the creatures here, how could he cross the infinite ocean? Find the mermaids. Rebuild the heavenly desolation city. More than 1,000 kilometers were covered in a flash. Some creatures encountered Han Fei, but they quickly fled and didn't fight him. Han Fei actually didn't lack these materials from these creatures. Now, things like spiritual spring and spiritual fruits were almost at Han Fei's fingertips. If it was convenient, he could rob them, but he wouldn't try so hard to get them. Han Fei felt that he was more like a kind of exploration now. The exploration of the unknown, the exploration of history, and the exploration of where the water fairy's body was. At this time, Han Fei realized that the reason why explorers were called explorers was more of a kind of pursuit of the unknown. He had learned a lot of secrets and had a general direction in his heart. But what about the others? They couldn't even touch the door. Clatter, the undersea forest-like landscape disappeared. Those hidden creatures no longer touched this water area. Instead, there was a piece of yellow sand. However, what made Han Fei vigilant was that under the yellow sand, there were a lot of dry bones, but not a single living creature. Until Han Fei saw a human woman in the center of this yellow sand. Han Fei had always thought that the half-snake must be a big demon that was half human and half snake. However, it turned out to be a woman with a slightly larger skeleton and an extremely beautiful face. And this woman's clothes were quite exquisite. She was dressed in the skin of a sea demon and decorated with bone products. From her left wrist to her neck and to her right elbow, there was a white python wrapped around her. At this moment, both of them were looking at Han Fei. Han Fei saw that this person was looking in his direction with a cold look, just like the snake head on her elbow, giving off a very strange feeling. Han Fei was stunned for a while, then gently waved his hand and said, "Hi." Chapter 1287. Han Fei said with a smile, but in his heart, he was very surprised. The feeling this woman gave him was extremely extraordinary. She didn't have a snake body. Although her skeleton looked larger than his, her face was cold and holy. In particular, the white snake wrapped around her body made her look even more inhuman. If he had to describe her with a feeling, Han Fei felt that she was the symbol of a fucking goddess. Her feet touched the ground calmly, accompanied by strange beasts, and her face looked like a goddess. To Han Fei's surprise, the demon purification pot didn't see any information from this person. He didn't even see any information about the white snake. Han Fei couldn't help but ask in his heart, "Old Yuan, is she a human or a demon?" The old turtle said, "To be precise, she is neither a human nor a demon, but a mutant born of a human and a sea demon. If it were an ordinary mutant, it wouldn't be a big deal, but this one was born with great luck. As a result, she almost became a son of God." Wow, Han Fei was stunned. "Are you fucking kidding me? Son of God?" Han Fei said in shock, "Are you saying that she is a descendant of a god? Didn't you say that the gods have already fallen? Has this woman lived here for more than 100,000 years?" The old turtle said angrily, "What I mean is that she almost became a son of God, but she failed, didn't she? Now, I can only say that her bloodline is a bit different. She may have awakened some bloodline from ancient times. What exactly is it? How do I know?" At this moment, the woman gently raised her right hand, and the white snake on her elbow propped herself up. She spat out her tongue and looked at Han Fei curiously. The woman said, "You are a powerful sea demon." Han Fei was puzzled. "Do I need you to tell me whether I am powerful or not?" Han Fei asked, "Who are you?" The woman raised her head slightly. "My surname is Bai." "Who?" Han Fei was speechless. Who the fuck asked what her surname was? He couldn't help but ask, then. What's your name? The woman glanced back. No one can help me. I only know that my surname is Bai. Han Fei didn't feel that this woman wanted to kill him. However, the other party was indeed on guard. Han Fei couldn't help but ask, then, Miss Bai, were you waiting for me? The woman nodded slightly. You killed the sea flower. Aside from me, there shouldn't be any living being on this level that's your match. Do you know there's another floor? The woman's expression was calm. I know. I came down one floor at a time. In 3 years at most, I will be able to enter the next level. Han Fei asked in surprise, you walked down floor by floor? The old turtle said in his heart, of course. She had been in the demon-subduing tower since she was born. Naturally, he had to start from the first floor. It's just that she lacked experience in the pagoda, causing her foundation to be imperfect. There are so many powerful creatures here. Isn't it enough for her? The old tortoise sneered. How long have you been here? You're already invincible on this floor, let alone her. All the living beings here were afraid of her, so who would dare to fight her? They're all on guard against her. Han Fei thought to himself, she can take the initiative to find other creatures to fight. However, this woman seems to be quite innocent. I wonder if she is willing to kill those creatures. Han Fei couldn't help but look at the woman. Then do you know the way to the next floor? The woman nodded. I do, but there are restrictions to go to the next floor. Can you do me a favor? Han Fei nodded. He was the kind of person who spoke politely the moment he came up. He wasn't a killer, so he wouldn't rush up and yell at her. So Han Fei said with a smile, tell me. I'll help you if I can. The woman's frown suddenly eased a lot. Han Fei could tell from her small movement that this woman seemed to have let out a long sigh of relief and put down a stone in her heart. Han Fei thought to himself, is she afraid that I won't help her? The woman said, come and hit me. Huh? Han Fei was stunned. No, Miss Bai, wait a minute. Hit you? The woman nodded. Because it's hard for me to find an opponent. Most of the outsiders will die before they can even reach my place. You're already the strongest outsider I've ever seen. Han Fei couldn't help but roll his eyes. Isn't that nonsense? Those who are stronger than me basically appear on the 4th floor. They won't appear on the 3rd floor at all. It's impossible for you to find someone stronger than me. Han Fei couldn't help but say, so, you want me to fight with you and help you polish your foundation, right? The woman nodded. The white snake on her elbow also nodded at the same time. The two seemed to have a tacit understanding. Han Fei thought to himself, I really haven't fought with such a strange person yet. The other party shouldn't be very weak. Han Fei smiled and said, okay, let's fight first and let me feel it. Although he knew that this woman should be very strong, and the old turtle even said that the other party almost became a divine prince. But Han Fei didn't think he was weak. Even if the other party was a real divine prince, so what? In Han Fei's blind confidence, he suddenly took action. He activated the Heavenly Void Divine Walking technique and his speed was extremely fast. In an instant, he appeared in front of the woman. The invincible fist mark bombarded. Just when Han Fei was considering whether or not he should hold back, he saw a piece of white gauze blocking his fist. Bam! The terrifying ripples spread out for dozens of kilometers. It could be seen how powerful Han Fei's punch was. And to Han Fei's slight horror, the woman brushed past him. One of his hands patted his shoulder lightly. In close combat, Han Fei had never been afraid of anyone so far. Since being trained by Ren Tianfei in the level 3 fishery, Han Fei felt that every bone and every muscle in his body seemed to be able to fight. Knowing that the other party was about to slap him, Han Fei moved his feet, exerted strength from his waist, and took the initiative to hit the slap with his shoulder. Rumble. At that moment, sand flew all over the sky and the sea exploded, roaring incessantly. Han Fei felt that his bones were about to break. He was horrified. What kind of godlike power is this? At the moment when the two sides collided, Han Fei had already realized that something was wrong. The other party was too strong, so he didn't hold back at that moment and poured out all his strength, but he was still slapped away and rolled dozens of times on the bottom of the sea. He felt that half of his body had been slapped numb. Cough. Han Fei grunted and found that he had suffered some internal injuries and blood was flowing from the corner of his mouth. The old turtle said, "Boy, do you really think you are invincible? The other party is half a step into the peak level, 2 realms higher than you. You didn't even use a secret method and you want to win? Let me tell you, she hasn't even used 50% of her strength." Han Fei was also depressed. This time, he was really careless. Yes, if it were an ordinary high-level Dao-seeking state powerhouse, no matter how strong his strength was, he would only have 500 waves of strength at most. However, the woman in front of him was obviously not an ordinary person. The woman said, "You can exert all your strength. The power you use now is too weak." When had Han Fei ever been evaluated like this by a woman? At that time, he was a little embarrassed. He stomped on the ground and activated devil transformation. Now, the old tortoise was in his body. At that time, he could still use the devil transformation technique. In the past, it had been discussed that the old tortoise's main body was still being suppressed somewhere. Since his main body was not destroyed, he could naturally use the devil transformation. Of course, after reaching the intermediate explorer level, the effect would be extremely low. The strength of devil transformation was only left with 2 times the normal strength. Compared to the Beast King art, it was still much weaker. However, double the strength was already quite a lot. Now that he had doubled his strength, he had a force of 700 waves, which had already surpassed the strength of an ordinary peak Dao-seeking cultivator. Han Fei stepped out again and appeared in front of the woman. This time, the invincible fist seal's aura was even stronger. It was dazzling and its speed was shocking. Since this woman's cultivation level was higher than his, it was impossible for him to defeat her. Han Fei didn't hold back anymore. His next move was completely different from before. The woman's eyes were filled with splendor. To Han Fei's full-strength punch, he stretched out a palm. Rumble, this time, the undersea vortex completely erupted. The vibrating ripples spread out for hundreds of kilometers in the blink of an eye. The perception of other creatures was released, but after seeing the power of this blow, they immediately fled away. This was too fucking terrifying. The power of his ultimate blow might not even be so strong, but these two people easily hit it. Cough, cough, the woman didn't move at all, but Han Fei took 7 or 8 steps back before he suddenly raised his head. The opponent's physical strength exceeds 700 waves. If I'm not mistaken, it may even reach 1,000 waves. And in this blow just now, the opponent still didn't use her full strength. The woman was a little puzzled. "You are very strong, but why do you fight with all your strength?" Han Fei smiled lightly. "I just want to see how strong you are." "Okay, now I'm going to fight hard." Chapter 1288. Wasn't this battle also a trial for Han Fei? It had only been half a year since he went through the tribulation and he had already become an intermediate explorer. The increase in his strength was too great. Han Fei was eager to sharpen himself so that he could fully adapt to this power. In a challenge, there was no such thing as pure strength. Battles were not decided by strength alone. If he didn't use the Beast King technique, he would definitely lose if he just competed in strength. At this moment, Han Fei flashed in the air with the closed distance technique, and the invincible fist marks swept in all directions. At this time, the white snake that Han Fei had always thought might be a spiritual beast raised half of its body. The moment Han Fei appeared in the air, the white snake had already determined his location. The woman stood on the spot without moving, giving Han Fei a real taste of the thousand-hand guanyin. After discovering that the closed-distance technique didn't work, Han Fei even summoned the phantom glass wings and began to flash infinitely. But even in this state, the woman could still keep up with the speed of his punches. The battle had only lasted for 5 minutes, and the surrounding energy was almost swallowed up by the two of them. The sand had already become a big pit. Agility of wind. Under the double acceleration of the heavenly void divine walking technique and the agility of wind, the woman finally changed her expression. She didn't expect that Han Fei's speed could be even faster. Suddenly, the so-called thousand-armed Guanyin disappeared. Instead, there were 3 oval-shaped void shields. It was as if 3 small portals had been blocked in front of her. Han Fei's invincible fist marks went in through the void gates and then bombarded her from all directions. Huh? Han Fei was surprised. A kind of spatial transfer technique similar to the shifting stars. It was also like the reverse space technique that the ghost ship encountered in the abyssal chasm. Seeing this scene, Han Fei withdrew his fist and the infinity water turned into a knife. As for himself, he used the stellar transposition technique to directly appear within the void shields. Huh? Seeing that Han Fei had so many means, the woman's pupils turned white, and she launched a power similar to Soul Explosion, trying to drive Han Fei away. Huh? The 100-beast soul-suppressing roar was activated. The woman's body trembled, and blood flowed out of her ears. Han Fei took the opportunity to launch the million-knife art. But to Han Fei's surprise, the woman's physique was also strong. With a sweep of the million-knife art, a clanging sound could be heard. However, Han Fei soon discovered a problem. It was not that the woman's physique was tough, but that her body was covered by a layer of white scales. However, although it was covered with white scales, it was still somewhat difficult to resist the invasion of the million-knife art. The woman and the white snake were injured once again as their scales were shattered. As if feeling the horror of the infinity water, in addition to the scales, a layer of fine sand was attached to the woman's body, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a sand battle suit. However, a round of infinity water also destroyed most of the battle suit. For this woman, this little bit of time seemed to be enough. Hundreds of sand tentacles extended from the bottom of the sea, trying to roll at Han Fei. Han Fei grabbed with one hand and crushed a tentacle. However, that tentacle didn't fall. It gathered again and began to recover. Seeing this scene, Han Fei knew very well that this was the woman controlling these sand with her soul power. It seemed that his 100-beast soul-suppressing roar just now didn't have much effect on her. The corners of Han Fei's mouth curled up slightly, and he launched a god-stunning stab with the spear in his hand. He immediately launched a sacrificing punch with the revolving star passage technique. Clang, clang, clang. Boom. Boom. The battle lasted for more than 10 minutes. It was a fierce battle of 300 rounds. After using the devil change technique and all his skills, he finally won by a fluke. At this time, the woman was smashed into the sand and had come to her senses. Seeing that Han Fei didn't chase after her, she sensed the surrounding energy slightly and knew that if she wanted to attack again, she would have to rest for at least a few hours. After a fierce battle, Han Fei used various means at the same time, but he barely won. But this was not a life-and-death battle. Although he had trump cards, this woman definitely had the same. If it was really a life-and-death battle, although Han Fei was confident that he wouldn't die, he would probably lose a layer of skin. The woman was blown dozens of kilometers away by Han Fei's punch. When she came back, the white snake was lying on her arm feebly. And the woman seemed to have only suffered minor injuries. The woman looked at Han Fei rather curiously. You are the first creature that can defeat me as an intermediate Tao-seeking state creature. You are much stronger than the sea demons that have appeared before. Han Fei thought to himself, fortunately, you didn't leave the demon sealing tower and weren't discovered by the people of the White Shell Kingdom. Otherwise, you would have either surrendered or died. Han Fei shrugged. You are already very strong. Among the people I know, there are less than 5 who are stronger than you in the same realm as you. Han Fei actually wanted to say that no one in the same realm as this woman could be stronger than him. But thinking that old Han and the others used to be heavenly talents, he decided to count them all in case this woman became arrogant. Han Fei thought for a moment, stretched out his hand, and a holy light technique descended, startling the white snake. However, when the white light descended, the white snake seemed to have stretched its back, and it immediately became more energetic. The woman glanced at Han Fei curiously, but she didn't ask further. She just nodded slightly. After a long time, she said, "Will you always stay here in the future? It seems that your realm is not enough for you to go to the next floor." Han Fei raised his eyebrows. "How strong do I need to be to go to the next floor?" The woman said, "When you reach the peak of the advanced Tao-seeking state, you can go to the next floor." Han Fei immediately frowned. By the time he reached the peak of the Tao-seeking state, it would be too late. How could it be so easy to reach the peak of the Tao-seeking state? Han Fei couldn't help but ask, "Miss Bai, let me ask you, do you know of a lotus here?" The woman was confused. "What is a lotus?" Han Fei was exhausted. Yes, this woman had never left the demon ceiling tower. She was a stranger to this whole world, so she naturally didn't know about lotuses. But the girl suddenly said, "Maybe, when you reach the next floor, maybe I can help you answer this question. If you are willing to come with me, I can wait for you to improve your realm." Han Fei saw the girl's frown again, but this time Han Fei's heart sank. "Who wants you to wait? And how many years have you been trapped here? Even if you reach the next floor, what can you do to help me?" Although he also needed to consolidate his strength, he knew that time was running out. But other people were different. For the old turtle, 1,000 years was not a long time. It might pass in a nap. For a normal Tao-seeking state big demon, 8 to 10 years was definitely not a long time. But for Han Fei, even 1 month was very important. He still didn't know how to get out. If he couldn't get out after a month, would Yu Tianxin and Changshui Qin think he had died? If the forbidden area was closed, wouldn't he have to find another way to leave the demon ceiling tower? Seeing that the woman should be simple, Han Fei asked directly, "Miss Bai, do you know how to leave the demon ceiling tower?" The girl was stunned for a moment, then shook her head slightly. "I have searched every floor, but there is no way to leave. I don't want to leave now." Han Fei's heart sank. This time he was screwed. Other people couldn't find a way to leave for their whole lives. The old turtle also said that he didn't come in through an array, but through the void. This also meant that unless he found the weak point of the void, it was almost impossible to go back the way he came. Han Fei's heart skipped a beat. He was afraid that to enter the demon ceiling tower, he had to bring some kind of token, through which he could find the weak point of the space. However, he didn't bring anything and came in quietly. He thought that Yu Tianxin and the others were unprepared. They probably didn't expect that he would run into the demon ceiling tower, which was the most forbidden place to enter. Han Fei said with a sullen face, "Miss Bai, is there no other way to go to the next floor? Is there an array between the upper and lower floors? If there is an array, I know a thing or two. You can have a look." The white snake on the girl's arm immediately propped up and stuck out its tongue. The girl said, "You know arrays? There is indeed a big array up and down, but I don't understand it. Besides, it is not exactly an array. You can come and have a look." Han Fei scanned with his perception and frowned. He didn't find an entrance or an array. The girl said, "You can't sense it there. Just follow me." After that, the two of them walked more than 300 kilometers one after the other and found a circular halo with a radius of about 50 meters. Even though he could see it with his naked eyes, under his perception, it was still a void, blank. Huh? Han Fei was slightly surprised. What a magical place. Besides, Han Fei understood why the girl said it was not exactly an array, because this array was floating in the halo, undulating in the void. Han Fei reached out and grabbed nothing, but he couldn't touch this strange array at all. At this moment, he heard the old turtle's leisurely voice. "A Taoist array has no entity. What you see is the trace of Taoist aura imprinted in the void. You have to also touch it with a Taoist array, or reach the peak of Tao seeking to be transmitted to the next floor." Chapter 1289. A Taoist Array. It was the first time that Han Fei had heard of a Taoist array. An array imprinted with a great Tao. Was the level of this demon-suppressing tower so high? Han Fei asked, "Do you mean that I have to enter the Tao and crack this array with my Tao?" The old turtle nodded. Yes, this should also be a kind of restriction. In the advanced Tao-seeking realm, there are not many people who can accurately grasp their own Tao and firmly go deep into this Tao. Generally speaking, they will be stuck on the threshold of entering the Tao at the peak of the Tao-seeking realm. When you reach the semi-venerable realm, you need to consider whether to enter this Tao or not. And you? What about me? The old turtle said leisurely, "I don't know. You should have discovered that you have suddenly given birth to another Tao seed. I've never heard of this before. Logically speaking, you have already entered the Tao, but I didn't notice it at all." Huh? I've entered the Tao. Han Fei was stunned. Although there was another Tao seed in his dantian, he didn't realize that he had entered the Tao. He only felt that he might have understood some of the paths ahead. Suddenly, Han Fei's heart trembled. Is it? My path is my Tao. Han Fei's body froze and he hurriedly asked, "Old Yuan, does it mean that no one has taken this path, and it means that this path is very strong?" The old turtle said, "I can't be completely sure. Generally speaking, those who can give birth to a Tao seed at your level generally don't take this kind of Tao. However, isn't your Tao seed a bit too small? It's only the size of a needle's eye. I can't be sure. However, in any case, the Tao seed that can be born is generally not weak. Most Taoists don't have such things as Tao seeds at all. Only some special Taoists will give birth to Tao seeds." Han Fei immediately took a breath. I see. In short, it could be summed up in one sentence: my Tao should be very special. Even if my Tao seed is only the size of a sesame seed, it can't change the fact that it is unique. Who said that the strength of a Tao was determined by the size of the Tao seed? Han Fei couldn't help but ask, "Since I have already entered the Tao, what about my Tao? How can I use my Tao?" The old turtle said, "You need to understand it yourself. I am not you, and I do not know your Tao. I don't even know how you gave birth to a Tao seed. How am I supposed to tell you?" Han Fei's face was stiff, which puzzled the woman next to him. Seeing that Han Fei's expression didn't change, she guessed that Han Fei probably couldn't break this array. He heard her say, "Is it very difficult?" Han Fei came back to himself and nodded calmly. "Yes, this is a Taoist array. If you want to open this formation, you need to draw a formation with Tao rhyme before you can break it." Taoist rhyme? The woman furrowed her brows a little. "I've seen many living beings enter, but most of them enter directly after reaching the peak of the Tao-seeking realm." Han Fei said, "It's possible that they entered the Tao at that moment." Han Fei didn't panic. He first looked at the complicated array. The contents of the formation did not seem to be very difficult. According to the outline of the formation, this should be some kind of teleportation formation. Although it was very different from an ordinary teleportation array, a teleportation array was still a teleportation array. Although the principle of activation was different, even if it looked like a flower, it was still a teleportation array. Therefore, a certain amount of spatial power was needed as the foundation of the teleportation array. This was like doing a question. No matter how complicated the question was, it was derived from simple questions and concepts. Therefore, this was what Han Fei understood. There was no unbreakable array in this world. It was just a matter of time. Han Fei already had a plan to break the array. Next, he just needed to try to break the array. But here came the problem. If he wanted to experiment, he had to learn to use his own Tao rhyme first. He had even given birth to a Tao seed, but he didn't know how to use it. Wasn't this embarrassing? Han Fei turned his head, looked at the woman, and said, "Miss Bai, I need some time to deduce it." The woman nodded slightly. "Okay." Han Fei directly called out Yuan Dao to protect him. After all, this was the first time he met this woman. It was impossible for him to trust her. During the battle with the flower of the sea, this woman must have seen Yuandao. Therefore, Han Fei didn't need to hide anything. The woman wasn't surprised by Yuandao's appearance at all. She seemed to have expected it. In fact, it could even be said that she had consciously retreated several dozen miles away. Han Fei sat cross-legged, calmed his mind, sank his consciousness into his dantian, and carefully looked at the Tao seed he had given birth to. In the words of the old tortoise, his knowledge was too shallow and he had never seen the world. Although Han Fei felt that he had seen enough of the world, from the various secrets he had dug out, there were still too many unknowns waiting for him to explore. The twists and turns of the process weren't important, but the process of exploration was important. To be more precise, he still had a long way to go. He hadn't been to the Yin-Yang Heavenly Palace yet. There was still half a drop of origin water waiting for him to get. However, there were as many puppets as dogs there. If he was weak, he might not even have a chance to get it. Also, he had to find Xia Shaochan. Then he had to become a king first. Otherwise, if he couldn't beat Chen Huangdian, everything would be in vain. Therefore, entering the Yin-Yang Heavenly Palace was his first step, and becoming a king was his second step. This would be an important turning point on Han Fei's path. Secondly, he had to find his sister and rebuild the Heavenly Desolate City. How many secrets were involved in this? The mystery of the fall of the gods involved in the 100,000 mountains, what happened at that time? If he wanted to know all this, he had to have strength and become stronger. He didn't expect that this simple spirit of exploration was also a path. When this path itself became a great Tao, how should he use the power of this great Tao? Han Fei frowned, and his mind revolved around the sesame-sized Tao seed. He thought to himself, how can this great Tao provide power for me? For example, the soul-splitting path. Its meaning was very clear, that was, to split the soul. For example, the Heavenly Enlightenment path. The Heavenly Enlightenment divine technique was used to save others and oneself. It could be used to bring the dead back to life, and it had endless magical uses. For example, the path of invincibility. That was a path of invincibility. The more powerful one walked, the more invincible one would be. And his own great Tao. Han Fei didn't know what to call it now. He had to know how to use it, right? Only in this way could he give it a name. Han Fei first channeled his spiritual power into the Tao seed, trying to understand the mystery of this great Tao. However, at the moment when his soul was immersed in it, Han Fei only saw a world of emptiness and darkness. There was nothing else but darkness. Han Fei frowned and channeled spiritual energy into the Tao seed again, only to see the Tao seed flickering. Han Fei felt his body tremble, and an arched object wrapped in white mist appeared in front of him. Judging from the shape, it seemed to be a bridge. Han Fei was a little depressed. He was just comprehending the great Tao. Why did a bridge appear? Moreover, this bridge was shrouded in fog. It didn't seem to show its body. Ha! Is this the great Tao? How could it appear directly? The old turtle couldn't help but exclaim, as if he had never seen such a weird great Tao. Han Fei wondered, shouldn't the great Tao appear directly? The old turtle looked solemn. It's not that there aren't any. It's just that the great Tao is a person's secret. If the great Tao is broken, your path may collapse. So, under normal circumstances, no one will show their great Tao at all. Han Fei's eyelids twitched. No. Then what's going on with me? The old turtle said, I don't know. I've never seen it before. This is your own great Tao. Walk on this bridge and see. Han Fei raised his eyebrows. Will there be any problems? The old turtle said grumpily, that's your own great Tao. What problems can there be? Don't tell me you're going to walk to your death. Han Fei nodded. It made sense. This is my own great Tao. What's wrong with me walking on it? Inexplicably, I created my own great Tao. What a freak. What a thing to brag about. So, Han Fei got up and walked straight onto the white mist bridge. When he stepped on it, it felt soft and didn't seem to feel anything. So, the second step, the third step, after 3 steps, Han Fei felt that his body began to become heavy. After a total of 7 or 8 steps, he came to the center of the bridge. Han Fei somehow felt that his legs were a little soft. He didn't know why. When Han Fei raised his foot and took another step forward, his body went limp and he sat directly on the bridge, trembling all over. More than that. Not only did Han Fei fail to cross the bridge, but he was also panting heavily. Even taking a deep breath was useless. He felt that his body was shaking like a sieve. Fuck. Old Yuan, didn't you say that this is my own great Tao? Why do I feel like I'm going to die? The old turtle was also a little stunned. How could someone walk on his own great Tao and end up like this? He thought to himself, this is the first time I've seen this. However, Han Fei's eyes were almost blurred by sweat. In a daze, Han Fei seemed to see a vague figure hidden in the white mist on the other side of the bridge. Han Fei felt that the figure was very familiar, and he even felt the pure power. However, his body could no longer support him. If he moved forward half a step, fuse. At this moment, Han Fei didn't choose to withdraw the power of the Great Tao, but tried to take a look at the other side of the bridge. When little black and little white fused, the yin-yang divine eyes appeared. At that moment, Han Fei seemed to see another himself on the other side of the bridge. In addition to his other self, Han Fei also seemed to feel a surging power, saw nothingness, and saw an array. Wait. Han Fei was stunned. Isn't that the array just now, the teleportation array with Taoist power? However, different from the array just now, the array on the other side of the bridge seemed to have some different Taoist power, as if it had been re-engraved. It was a pity that he only caught a glimpse of it and didn't see it completely. There was no telling if the power had been exhausted, but the white mist bridge disappeared. Han Fei staggered and almost fell. Fortunately, the surrounding energy and spiritual energy swept over, and Han Fei took a breath to stabilize his body and recover. Han Fei took a deep breath. My Tao. Chapter 1290. It was the first time that Han Fei had touched the Great Path, and he didn't even understand how he got on this path. Perhaps it had something to do with the course of his life, or the path he wanted to take, or everything he had experienced. It was inextricably linked to everything he had experienced. Han Fei felt that the question was not how he got on this path. This great Tao was extremely peculiar. Even though he did not understand it, he still felt that it was amazing. There were 2 ends of the bridge. If he was on one end of the bridge, who was on the other end? Was it still himself? Wouldn't that be a paradox? How could there be so many of them? Besides, in the glimpse just now, although Han Fei vaguely saw that there seemed to be himself on the other end of the bridge, there was also darkness and the Taoist array that had been re-engraved. A thought suddenly came to Han Fei's mind. Could it be that he could see the future with this path of mine? As the saying went, the past was gone, and the future was coming. The past was a foregone conclusion. Even if he returned to the age of doom, it was difficult to change the course of the world with his own strength. However, the future was different. There were countless possibilities in the future. Every decision he made now, every choice he made, could give birth to countless different answers in the future. If it was such a path, how could he cross this bridge? Dozens of kilometers away, the woman saw the white mist that Han Fei released just now, but she didn't see the bridge, and the bridge was actually hidden by the white mist. Even Han Fei himself couldn't see the bridge clearly when he stepped on it. Therefore, the woman and the white snake didn't speak, but they were also full of curiosity. They had never been out of the demon-subduing tower in their lives, so everything they saw was new. Besides, in the woman's view, the moment Han Fei stepped into the white mist, he had disappeared, and she couldn't see him at all. Even his aura couldn't be felt. This seemed to be similar to the teleportation array. Han Fei's attention was not on the woman at the moment. After calming down a little, Han Fei was about to call out the white mist bridge again, wanting to go up and see what was going on. However, a magical scene appeared. As his spiritual energy was injected into it, the Tao seed didn't respond. The brilliance was still blooming, but the white mist bridge didn't appear. Han Fei immediately raised his eyebrows. Old Yuan, did I have a problem entering the Tao just now? The old turtle seemed to be in deep thought as well. He said in a deep voice, you've already entered the Tao. How can there be a problem in entering the Tao? Then why can't I summon the white mist bridge just now? The old turtle frowned. I don't know either. There is nothing wrong with your behavior. The other side of the bridge is shrouded in white mist. Even I can't see anything. From this, it can be seen that your path is quite mysterious. The reason why you can't say it now is probably because you haven't figured out your own Tao. The reason why it appeared just now might be because the great Tao has just begun to manifest. Hearing this, Han Fei couldn't help but frown. After the first manifestation, there was no second manifestation. Han Fei sat down again. What was the meaning behind those scenes that he had seen? Did he see me? Did he feel the attraction of power? Did he see the altered Tao array? Or was there a connection between the three? If there had to be a connection, he couldn't say for sure, but power was what he pursued. It seemed to imply his future growth. That Tao array was the only way to the fourth floor of the demon-suppressing pagoda. Did this mean that the growth of his strength would enable him to comprehend the Tao array to the fourth floor of the demon-suppressing pagoda? If this was the case, this bridge would become a kind of prophecy, which was similar to the foreseeable future. Then Han Fei tried 2 more times but still couldn't summon the white mist bridge. He tried again and looked at the Tao array for a long time. He tried to draw an array in the void to crack this Tao array. However, he couldn't exert his Tao aura, and the array he drew couldn't be integrated into the Tao array at all. What exactly is my Tao? Han Fei was depressed. The great Tao could already be seen. It was a bridge of white fog. However, how could he use its power? First of all, he had to know what this white mist bridge could do. What could he use it for? 3 hours later, Han Fei suddenly came to the woman surnamed Bai and said lightly, I still have a lot of questions that I may not be able to solve in a short time. I might as well be your sparring partner. In this way, you and I can polish the foundation, which is better than meditating. The girl nodded slightly, and the white snake on her arm flicked out its tongue gently. In the blink of an eye. 3 days passed in a flash. On the 3rd floor of the demon-suppressing pagoda, within 500 kilometers of Han Fei, there was not a single creature. The battle here was too terrifying and the noise was too big. Almost every 2 hours, the spiritual qi and energy in the surroundings would be sucked dry. On the 3rd day. Unexpectedly, Han Fei had grasped the 64-dimensional fish dragon dance. At this moment, he was jumping around in an ocean of spiritual plants. In fact, as early as in the last few battles on the first day, the woman surnamed Bai had unlocked her manipulator skills. This shocked Han Fei. He remembered what the old turtle said. Damn, is she the child of a human manipulator and a sea demon? She even inherited the manipulator's skills. Han Fei, who was used to fighting, was not afraid of these spiritual plants at all. However, what forced him to run was that the white snake actually had the eyes of petrification. Under the gaze of the white snake's eyes would emit green light. Wherever the green light shone, everything would be petrified. In the early stages of encountering this technique, Han Fei's legs were shrouded, causing his lower body to be petrified. Then, the other party caught up with him and launched a series of fatal attacks. Although he had the support of arrays, it was useless. However, fortunately, Han Fei found that this kind of petrification did not really turn into stone, but his body was stiff. If it was stiff to a certain extent, it was no different from petrification, and he might be cut into pieces at the first touch. However, Han Fei was still alive and full of vitality. Therefore, under the impact of vitality, the petrification effect on his legs quickly disappeared. However, that battle was very tragic. Han Fei lost. This made Han Fei a little speechless. As expected, he was not invincible in the same realm. This was just the Waterwood Heaven, a very barren forbidden area of the Divine Palace. Well. Han Fei couldn't help but smile bitterly. He was used to being taught by the old turtle. Now, Han Fei often felt that the Yin-Yang Heaven and the Waterwood Heaven were two barren lands that no one cared about. In the first place, there shouldn't be any heaven-defying, demon-like prodigies. At this moment, with the help of the star-shifting technique, he protected himself with arrays. The white snake phantom enlarged, and its eyes seemed to be locked on the surrounding void. As soon as Han Fei came out, the array broke, and his body began to become slightly crystal clear. Han Fei hurriedly released a flash skill, fusing with Little Black and Little White. With the magical power of the Yin-Yang divine eyes, he avoided the next white snake's gaze. However, he barely avoided it, and the two sides were tied. Han Fei suddenly felt a little annoyed. This woman's strength is improving too fast. Since the first 2 days, she had almost lost more than she won. Now, the victory and defeat were basically tied, and it only took about 3 days. As for the duration of the battle between the two of them, it had basically reached about 100 breaths, which was more than 3 times the original duration. This not only made this woman's strength improve rapidly, but also quickly consolidated Han Fei's strength that had just broken through. Besides, Han Fei's spiritual power had also slightly increased on the basis of the consolidation of his strength. The battle was tied. Han Fei couldn't help waving his hand and saying, "Hey! What kind of snake is this? Is it because I'm not fast enough? I've obviously surpassed your reaction speed. How can it still notice me in advance?" The woman surnamed Bai said, "Your speed has already surpassed mine. So, a few days ago, I stopped competing with you in speed. I found that Bai Ling can predict the source of danger in advance. Although this ability was not obvious at first. But your fighting style is too strong." So, Bai Ling gradually adapted to this kind of foresight. Foresight? Han Fei couldn't help but be stunned. With the double speed of the heavenly void divine walking technique and the agility of wind, this woman couldn't possibly keep up with him. Even this white snake couldn't. It didn't keep up with him in the first 2 days, but on the 3rd day, it suddenly began to catch up with him. Wasn't this strange? Now it seemed that it was a kind of dangerous foresight. However, wasn't this foresight a bit too accurate? This meant that before he used the star-shifting technique and flash, it already knew where he would go. Han Fei couldn't help but smile at Bai Ling, "Little snake, you're as good as my little white." The white snake stuck out its tongue, and the woman surnamed Bai said, "Bai Ling said that it is not an associate spirit. So, it's not comparable to your associate spirit." Han Fei was surprised. Not an associate spirit? Then who is she? The woman surnamed Bai said, "She is my sister." Han Fei. At that moment, Han Fei didn't feel good. One was a human, and the other was a little snake. How did they become sisters? The woman surnamed Bai said, "It's been like this since I was born. I control strength, and it controls spirit. In some moments, it can indeed see into the future, which should be a kind of foresight." Huh? Han Fei's heart suddenly skipped a beat. See into the future? It's a bit like my white mist bridge. Wait, I seem to have overlooked something. If I have a clear short-term goal, will the white mist bridge appear? Isn't this my path? Chapter 1291. This white snake only had a premonition of danger, but it didn't mean that it could see the future. However, Han Fei's white mist bridge might have this ability. In order to verify his idea, Han Fei came to the edge of the Taoist array. Looking at the floating lines of the array in the light and shadow, Han Fei was imagining the scene he saw before and secretly activated the Taoist seed. Han Fei only felt that there was power surging in his body, and an inexplicable idea of arrays emerged in his mind. Han Fei stretched out his hand and drew an array in the air. This time, The array seal that Han Fei placed seemed to have a Taoist aura. Even Han Fei himself felt a little amazed. It turned out that this was how his Taoist path should be used. In fact, Han Fei didn't see the future completely, but he happened to see a corner of the future with the help of the yin-yang divine eyes. In his imagination, he seemed to have insight into something, but he couldn't fully know that it was the future. The only thing that gave Han Fei room for guessing was the scene that he saw that had been changed. If he guessed right, this should be what he changed, right? It was actually not difficult to change an array. The difficult thing was to add a Taoist aura to it when drawing it. At this moment, when Han Fei drew the first array line, a hazy light mist fell along with the line. At that moment, Han Fei seemed to understand the use of this Taoist aura. I see. This was not seeing through the future, but passing off the false as the real. Imagination. Han Fei was shocked. Isn't this the fucking power similar to the ideal palace? Whatever I want, I can have it. When this power was used, Han Fei had a glimmer of enlightenment. It turned out that what he saw was not a real picture of the future, but a thought in his subconscious. At this time, Han Fei was very sure that the Taoist aura lines he had drawn now actually didn't match the Taoist array in front of him. However, in the picture he saw before, the lines of the array seemed to have broken this Taoist array. In other words, he had integrated an unmatched array into this Taoist array and achieved the effect of passing off the false as the real one. Of course, after trying the power, Han Fei felt that maybe his understanding of the Taoist path was not enough. If he reached an extremely profound level, would he really be able to pass off the false as the real one? It seemed that the power of the white mist bridge was beyond his imagination. Han Fei tried again, activating the Tao seed with his mind, trying to directly reach the peak level of Tao seeking. All of a sudden, Han Fei felt that an external force seemed to be attached to him. However, it had increased his overall power by nearly 100 waves. Unfortunately, he was still far from reaching the peak of Tao seeking. Looks like there are quite a few restrictions. Ever since the white fog bridge appeared for the first time, it had never appeared again. This time, although he had suddenly thought of a way to use it, and the effect seemed to be extremely high, it wasn't exaggerated to a terrifying extent. At the very least, from the looks of it, the power bestowed upon him by the Great Tao was not as strong as the devil transformation technique. Little did he know that if others knew what he was thinking, they might want to slap him to death. Han Fei was still reflecting on himself at this moment. On one hand, it was because his realm and strength were not high enough, and on the other hand, it was because his understanding of the Great Tao in this aspect was not enough. Seeing that Han Fei could integrate the array into the Tao array, the woman surnamed Bai couldn't help but ask, "You cracked this array?" Han Fei shook his head slightly. "Not really. I can only draw arrays now. How to break the formation? I still need to think about it." The woman surnamed Bai took a deep look at Han Fei and asked in confusion, "Have you entered the Tao?" This kind of thing naturally couldn't be hidden. Although this woman had never left the demon-subduing tower, she was not a fool. It was impossible that she couldn't even see this. So, Han Fei nodded casually. "Yes, it turns out that even if I have entered the Tao, if my strength is not high enough, I still can't be teleported to the next floor. So, I still have to crack the array." Regarding arrays, the woman surnamed Bai naturally didn't understand, but Han Fei knew. Although his cracking method was wrong, he could confuse the Tao array itself to a point where it could pass off as real. In a short time, he could fabricate something out of nothing. And once such a fake array appeared, it was easy for Han Fei to infer the real way to crack this array. This was like doing a question. If he could know the final answer to the question in advance, it would be much easier for him to reason about the process. This was the situation Han Fei was in now. If everything went well, as long as he tried a few more times, this Tao array would be cracked in less than a day. This time, Han Fei was not anxious anymore. He couldn't help but ask, "Miss Bai, why do you insist on going to the next floor?" "I think that since the creatures outside have a way to come in, the people inside must have a way to go out, right?" The woman surnamed Bai looked indifferent and said casually, "First of all, I can come in, but it doesn't mean I can go out. Secondly, I want to continue down. I want to know who I am." Huh? Han Fei couldn't help but be stunned. "You don't know who you are? Then how do you know your surname is Bai?" The woman surnamed Bai said softly, "Inheritance." Han Fei immediately realized that although this woman looked like a human being, she was actually not a human being, nor was she a big demon, but a special creature. Han Fei had known that there were inheritances among creatures. For example, spiritual beasts, contractual spiritual beasts, as long as their quality and level were high, who didn't have an inheritance of combat skills. The old turtle said, "This woman is neither a human nor a demon, but a special kind of creature. It's normal that she has an inheritance. However, I'm still a little confused. I didn't sense any abnormality in her bloodline. She must have had an anomaly when she was born. But I don't know how she appeared in this demon ceiling tower." Han Fei said, "Maybe her parents saw that the child they gave birth to was too weird, so they threw her into this demon ceiling tower and left her alone. I'm going to take a look on the next floor. Even if I can't return to the forbidden area of the capital, I have to find a way out." Han Fei was not very panicked now. After all, he was very sure that the water fairy was in this demon ceiling tower. The difficulty was that the water fairy should be very low, and Han Fei even suspected that her real body was at the bottom. After all, Yu Tianxin once said that even the king-level deep-sea behemoths in the capital of Bai Bei had sensed the threat from the bottom of the demon ceiling tower and dared not enter. He was only an intermediate explorer now. In this demon ceiling tower, he could only go to the 5th floor at most. Even the 5th floor was not enough for him. This was only the 3rd floor, but he had already encountered a creature like the flower of the sea and a powerful opponent like the woman surnamed Bai. God knew what kind of behemoths there would be at the semi-venerable level. If he encountered a legendary creature at the semi-venerable level, he and Yuan Dao might not be able to fight it. However, no matter which floor he could go to, could he find the water fairy? He had to continue to go down. Otherwise, it would be meaningless to stay on this 3rd floor. It would just be a waste of his time. One day later. In the array of floating seals, thousands of lines were connected and outlined together, making the already brilliant array even more brilliant. The old turtle asked, "Why didn't I notice the Taoist aura you used?" Han Fei thought to himself, "Do you know anything about balls? My great path has always been to pass off the fake as the real. It's a kind of power that has no substance and is imaginary, just like in the ideal palace." Unlike the ideal palace had limitations. In addition to infinite spiritual energy and energy, it could only summon a few weapons, which was very limited. However, his white mist bridge was different. It could really produce a kind of future power or result out of thin air. When his realm was higher and his understanding of the Taoist aura deepened, the effect would only get better and better. Han Fei even suspected that if one day he could directly walk to the other side of the white mist bridge, would he be able to walk to the future? As a matter of fact, when the last stroke was completed, the entire Dao array began to tremble with a hum. Han Fei narrowed his eyes slightly. This original Taoist aura was trying to swallow the Taoist aura he had drawn in an attempt to consolidate itself. Han Fei immediately looked at the woman and the white snake. "Let's go. Do you want to go to the next floor?" The woman surnamed Bai's eyes flashed and she jumped to Han Fei's side. "Thank you." Han Fei nodded. "Let's go." The two of them stepped into the formation one after the other, and with a schwa, they disappeared into the formation. The next second, Han Fei felt that there was a golden light in front of him. When he took a closer look, it turned out to be a seabed sand bed. He scanned it with his perception and found that the range was more than 800 kilometers. Shoot! Han Fei was shocked, because he didn't find any creatures here. Would this happen in the demon subduing tower? That was impossible. Only the strong had territory. Such a large sea of sand, if there were no creatures guarding it, would have been occupied long ago. Besides, The peak-level Dao-seeking experts who could guard such a large area couldn't be simple. They should at least be as strong as the flower of the sea and the woman surnamed Bai. The only thing that puzzled Han Fei was that around the third floor, there was also a sea of sand. Why was there another sea of sand at the entrance of the fourth floor? Han Fei looked back at the teleportation array. It was still a Taoist aura. But this array was not shrouded in light. Only the imprint of the array was floating in the void. Han Fei frowned. It seems that it is more difficult to go back than to come in. Bam! Just when Han Fei was still observing the surrounding environment and watching out for any sneak attack, he saw the entire sea of sand suddenly rioted. Every grain of gravel was floating in the air, just like dust in the air. The number of gravel kept increasing. Slowly, these suspended grains of sand began to roll up like extremely tiny sharp blades, strangling Han Fei and the woman surnamed Bai. Huh! The invincible will appeared, and Han Fei stepped out of the Great Plate Turtle array. He was about to let Little Black and Little White fuse, and then with Little White's keen perception ability, find the source of danger, and kill the enemy first. But before Han Fei took action, he heard the woman surnamed Bai suddenly shout in his ear, "Father, is that you?" Chapter 1292. Han Fei was confused. What did she mean? He had always thought that the woman surnamed Bai was thrown into the demon-subduing tower as soon as she was born. Why was her father here? A glaring King Kong appeared. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but when Han Fei used the power of Law Enforcer again, he found that this King Kong seemed to be alive. Under normal circumstances, the power of Law Enforcer, to some extent, symbolized the path a person took. For example, this King Kong phantom. Han Fei actually wanted to take the path of body refinement, a path closer to the invincible realm. But at this moment, his path had become a bridge of white mist, and he had only revealed a little bit of his power, which seemed to have nothing to do with the power of Law Enforcer. Han Fei had thought that his power of Law Enforcer didn't blend with his path, but it seemed that this was not the case. On the contrary, the power of Law Enforcer seemed to have become stronger. Because Han Fei had forged a half-golden body, his body was at least as strong as that of a half-venerable. Even if he didn't use the power of Law Enforcer and let these yellow sand blades hit his body, they might not be able to break his body. However, Han Fei thought that the creatures that could survive in the demon-subduing tower must have their own uniqueness, not to mention a powerful creature that occupied a corner of the first floor. Perhaps, he still had some special methods. But when the woman surnamed Bai called him father, Han Fei knew that this woman didn't seem to be so simple. This demon-subduing tower didn't seem to be so simple. If this woman's parents were both in this demon-subduing tower, why did this woman go to the first floor of the demon-subduing tower? Could it be that the child born on the fourth floor automatically appeared on the first floor without going through the teleportation array? Han Fei and the woman surnamed Bai were both waiting, but the yellow attack didn't weaken. The woman surnamed Bai was also covered with a layer of white scale armor, and clanking sounds were also made when she was hit. Han Fei's perception swept over and over again, but he didn't find any special creatures in this sea of sand. Except for some dry bones under this sea of sand, there seemed to be no living creatures. Han Fei couldn't help asking, "Miss Bai, are you sure your father is here?" The force of the sand was getting stronger and stronger. Did he not hear it? Why don't you shout again? While talking, Han Fei said to the old turtle, "Old Yuan, where are the creatures in this sea of sand? Why didn't I sense it?" The old turtle's voice was unhurried. "Dead, buried at the bottom of the sea of sand." Han Fei's face slightly changed, and his perception was about to explore the sea of sand crazily, when the old turtle said, "Don't. It's coming out." Han Fei felt that his blood was freezing. "Wait, didn't you say he was dead? Why did you come out again?" The old turtle sneered, "Kid, don't tell me you haven't seen this much. An undying being. Wouldn't a cultivator at the peak of the Dao-seeking realm be dead?" Han Fei narrowed his eyes and asked, "Change my vocation?" Hearing the word change, Han Fei knew that there must be a big story. Li Daxian, the ancestor of the Thug clan, was also an undying being. If the human's will and strength were preserved, then what was the difference between an undying being and a living being? Hula, the yellow sand rose as if a hill was rising from the ground. At this moment, a rather beautiful human corpse finally appeared in Han Fei's perception. Although the corpse's white clothes were broken and his face was extremely pale, his eyebrows were eye-catching, heroic, and he looked extremely steady and calm. Ha! A human? Han Fei was stunned for a moment. Sure enough, the old turtle was right. Was this woman born from a human and a sea demon? Han Fei couldn't help but wonder, if the child of a human and a sea demon could look like this girl, it would be totally acceptable. She was born full of immortal air. What's wrong with raising such a daughter? Bam! The sand dune exploded, and the middle-aged man in a long robe, with a pale and cold face, stood on the sea of sand, quietly looking at the woman surnamed Bai. At this moment, the flying sands suddenly stopped. Han Fei secretly breathed a sigh of relief. This man didn't look weak. After all, the scene of a father and a daughter meeting was better than the scene of a father and a daughter killing each other. The woman surnamed Bai seemed a little excited and called out again, "Father?" The middle-aged man's head was raised a little stiffly, as if he was thinking hard or thinking about something. Han Fei found that something was wrong and shouted, "Old Yuan, what's going on? Isn't this man an undying being? Why does it seem that he doesn't know his daughter now?" The old turtle said, "They should know each other. Just wait patiently." Han Fei stepped back a little. It was not good for him to be a third wheel when the father and daughter met. The middle-aged man stared at the woman in white for a long time, and his face began to twist slightly, as if in pain. Then, in the yellow sand, vines stretched out one after another. In a moment, the vines had covered the space of dozens of kilometers. Han Fei watched that these vines were slowly emerging from the bottom of the sea, dragging a ball that was wrapped in it. When the ball wrapped by vines and algae appeared, Han Fei, the woman surnamed Bai, and the white snake all looked at it. And the middle-aged man slowly walked to the ball, raised his hands slightly, and the vines spread out. He saw a half-human, half-snake woman curled up in the middle of it. The snake demon clenched her fists as if she were afraid of the cold and looked very pitiful. Han Fei immediately sensed that this man was not dead, but he was already in his twilight years. She was seriously lacking vitality and seemed to be dying at any time. On the woman's body, the skin in some places was pierced by extremely thin vines and extended into her body. Ah, in the vines, there was still the power of vitality slowly nourishing this woman. Han Fei immediately took a breath. This man turned into an undying being and used all his vitality on his wife. The old turtle grunted. It should be so. Moreover, this person has been working hard to suppress his own cultivation, sealing his own strength, and letting himself fall into a deep slumber. Han Fei narrowed his eyes. That's why he attacked at the beginning. After he came out, he showed a painful look. In fact, his seal is being unlocked. The old turtle said, "Once the seal is unlocked, I'm afraid it's not up to him anymore. I'm afraid he has to go to the 5th level, break through, and reach the 6th level." At this moment, the middle-aged man gently stroked the snake demon. "Madam, our daughter is here." Even Han Fei was a little moved by her words. What exactly happened back then? Why did things end up like this? Hearing these words, the woman surnamed Bai couldn't help but shed a line of tears. And the white snake, with its propped-up body, slowly lay on the shoulder of the woman surnamed Bai, looking very sad. Under the call of the middle-aged man, the haggard, thin snake demon quickly absorbed the vitality of the spiritual plant and then slowly opened her eyes. However, the moment she opened her eyes, Han Fei clearly felt that her vitality was fading away. The speed was so fast that Han Fei could directly perceive it. Not only Han Fei, but the woman surnamed Bai and the white snake could also feel it. Because the snake demon's hair was slowly turning yellow. Although it hadn't turned white yet, it should be soon. The woman surnamed Bai stepped in front of the snake demon and shouted in panic, "Mother!" Han Fei couldn't help but say, "Her vitality is fading away. At this rate, she'll die in less than 2 hours." The woman surnamed Bai quickly looked at Han Fei and then at the middle-aged man in panic. The middle-aged man tried to put on a smile on his face. "An hour is enough. Girl. I want to see you, but I'm afraid to see you. Because if we meet again, it will be farewell forever. I'm in a dilemma." The middle-aged man's eyes were gentle. He looked at the woman surnamed Bai deeply and then at the snake demon, before he heaved a long sigh. The so-called farewell meant that when the snake demon died and he unlocked himself, they could only be together for a few hours at most. For the first time, Bai Ling slithered down from the woman's body and climbed to the snake demon's body. When the snake demon opened its eyes and saw Bai Ling and the woman surnamed Bai, it was overjoyed and tears glistened in its eyes. The snake demon looked at the middle-aged man in shock. "Is it really a girl?" The man in the middle nodded. "I know. My son is blessed." The snake demon immediately burst into tears of joy and grabbed the woman surnamed Bai's hand, unwilling to let go. The woman surnamed Bai thought that she could reunite with her family after searching for them all the way. However, as soon as they met, they would be separated forever. After all, she was still a girl who had never seen the world. How could she withstand such a test? The woman surnamed Bai asked, "Why did this happen?" The middle-aged man reached out and gently stroked her hair, as if he felt somewhat guilty. "As a human heavenly talent, it was taboo for me to marry your mother. Maybe our marriage violated the heavenly Tao. When I gave birth to you, the weather changed, and an earth-shaking white lotus appeared. To avoid being hunted by my enemies, I hid in the demon-subduing tower to avoid the disaster. Who could have known that your mother and you fell on different floors of the tower because of our different realms? I had to lower my realm to look for you. Unfortunately, I could only find your mother in the end. At that time, you were still a baby and had no power to protect yourself. I thought that you might be in danger. But you were born with great luck, and you should be blessed. But your mother's qi and blood are deficient, and her vitality is almost non-existent. That's why I had to cultivate the undead art to protect your mother." The snake demon said with guilt, "Girl, don't blame me for not lowering my realm to look for you. If I lowered my realm, not only would I not be able to find you, but I would also probably die." The woman surnamed Bai and the white spirit python certainly wouldn't blame him at this moment. Their eyes were full of tears. Han Fei's head was buzzing, and he couldn't help but ask in surprise, "The earth-shaking white lotus?" The middle-aged man glanced at Han Fei. Seeing that Han Fei didn't have any killing intent and came with his daughter, he said, "Yes, it's a great blessing and a great disaster. With Qingyang's talent, how could she give birth to a child? Therefore, although the earth-shaking white lotus was good, it also deprived Qingyang of all her life. So, she gave birth to my son." At this moment, Han Fei and the old turtle almost said at the same time, "Reincarnate?" Chapter 1293. They might not know who this middle-aged man was, but Han Fei did. In this world, there was no such thing as great luck. The water fairy's original form was a white lotus. The so-called white lotus shocked the world, and great luck probably had something to do with the water fairy. Han Fei suddenly thought of something and couldn't help but cup his hands at the middle-aged man. "Sir, are you from the Cloud Sea Divine Tree?" The middle-aged man raised his eyebrows slightly. Although Han Fei came with his daughter, Han Fei was a half-mermaid after all, who was his enemy. How could he be completely reassured? However, the middle-aged man was confident that Han Fei was no match for him. Therefore, he hadn't attacked Han Fei yet. He was just on guard. The middle-aged man nodded. "Yes. You and I are enemies, but I have long been trapped in the demon ceiling tower. Little brother, you don't have to give me a hard time, do you?" However, Han Fei's face began to change, including his body and aura. Under the gaze of the middle-aged man, the snake demon, the woman surnamed by, and the white snake, he turned from a half-mermaid into a human. Han Fei waved his hand, put on a battle suit, held a longbow, and said with a smile, I am Han Fei from the Cloud Sea Divine Tree, Flying Feather Clan. Nice to meet you, senior. The woman surnamed by and the white snake both looked at Han Fei in surprise. This guy who had fought with them for 3 days was not a sea demon. The middle-aged man's body suddenly trembled. However, his face didn't change, and his voice was slightly low. Transformation technique? This doesn't prove that you are from the Cloud Sea Divine Tree, does it? Since you can transform, it's hard for me to guess. Han Fei spread out his hand, and Jing Er's venerable token suddenly appeared in his hand. Do you know this? Wow! The middle-aged man, who had never changed his expression since they met, was shocked at this moment. Even though he was already an undead creature, he still couldn't hide his shock. Jing's venerable token. Han Fei grinned. It seems that you haven't been trapped in the demon's ceiling tower for a long time. Now, can you prove my identity? The middle-aged man nodded slightly. Of course. Han Fei immediately said, Senior, may I know your name? The middle-aged man was slightly stunned. You proved yourself just to ask for my name? You didn't have to work so hard to ask. The middle-aged man cupped his fists and said, Zhang Yao, Cloud Sea Divine Tree, Silver Bow Unit. Han Fei and the old turtle said at the same time, sure enough, he doesn't believe in white. At their level, they could guess a lot of things as long as a piece of information was exposed. For example, Zhang Yao's world-shaking white lotus was definitely not a coincidence. In this case, it made sense. Why was this woman surnamed by so powerful? There was actually someone in the advanced Dao-seeking state that Han Fei couldn't beat. He was so difficult to deal with, but he had never left the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. How could such a peerless monster appear so casually? To confirm his speculation, Han Fei asked again, Senior, may I ask what your occupation is? Although Zhang Yao didn't understand, he still said, a soul warrior and a spirit gatherer. It's because I'm a spirit gatherer that I can live to see my son. Han Fei's heart sank again. If Zhang Yao was not a manipulator, was this snake demon? However, he had never seen a sea demon that could control spiritual plants like this. Even if it had the ability of a manipulator, it shouldn't be a snake demon. Han Fei took a breath and looked at the woman surnamed by in front of him. If I'm not wrong, this is the reincarnation of the water immortal, right? He had been looking for the water fairy for a long time. Little did he know that she was also saving herself. Furthermore, he had used such a method to be reborn. And this time, she was no longer a demonic plant, but a special creature that he didn't know what she was? Although Han Fei guessed a lot, the reincarnation of the water fairy didn't know his true identity. At this moment, the woman surnamed by seemed to be lost in thought. Why do I remember that my surname is Bai? Isn't my father's surname Zhang? Did I not inherit the power of my parents? Seeing the weird looks on Han Fei's face, Han Fei thought that this might be his own luck. Although it was a coincidence, it was also inevitable. The original body of the water fairy had lived for too long. And now, only her soul was left. What happened to her body? She didn't even know. What Han Fei didn't understand was why the water fairy didn't tell him such important news when he was in the Thousand Mountain Ancient Realm. If she had told him earlier that she had begun to be reborn in another body, he wouldn't have been so anxious. At this moment, Han Fei didn't hide it anymore. He said, to be honest, the reason why I entered the demon ceiling tower this time is to find the news of the world-shocking White Lotus you mentioned. Senior, do you know more about the world-shocking White Lotus? However, Zhang Yao looked at the snake demon with a troubled expression. The snake demon said, Yao, it's okay. Anyway, my death is inevitable. Since this is a human and he came for the world-shocking White Lotus, just give it to him. The middle-aged man said solemnly, but you just saw our daughter. The snake demon sighed slightly. I can die without regrets now that I can see her again in this life. Besides, our little girl has already become so beautiful, I should be happy. Han Fei suddenly interjected and said to the middle-aged man, well, senior. If you are worried about Madame's vitality and lifespan, I think, this should be useful. Han Fei reached out and a drop of the spring of life appeared in Han Fei's palm. The reason why Han Fei took out the spring of life was very simple. The water fairy had been reborn in his body. The water fairy's talent was so high that she almost sucked up her mother's lifespan, which led to Zhang Yao becoming an undead creature. For the sake of entering the Tao, even if it was to cut off this big karma, he had to return the favor. Fortunately, he was not too greedy before and directly used 3 drops of the spring of life. Who would have thought that it would come in handy at this time? Hiss, the spring of life. Zhang Yao looked at the spring of life in Han Fei's hand in shock, and his eyes flickered. He hurriedly said, little brother, I have been arrogant all my life. I have never asked anyone for anything. I know how precious a drop of the spring of life is. But now, I want to ask you to give me this spring of life. I will repay you with my life. The snake demon pulled Zhang Yao's arm, and the white snake stood up and looked at Han Fei. The reincarnation of the water fairy, the woman surnamed Bai, also looked at Han Fei. Han Fei looked solemn and directly pushed this drop of spring of life to the middle-aged man. Whether Senior has clues about the world-shocking white lotus or not, this drop of spring of life will be given to you. Han Fei has nothing to ask for. Zhang Yao took a deep look at Han Fei. I can't thank you enough. We do have information about the world-shocking white lotus. It's hidden in Qingyang's body. This is a white lotus. The reason why Qingyang was able to survive all these years is because of this white lotus. Only then did Han Fei realize that Zhang Yao was not a manipulator. Then where did the spiritual plants all over the ground come from? In this way, it must be the power of this white lotus. Han Fei hurriedly said, Senior, you'd better take the spring of life quickly. A drop of spring of life can equal 100 years of lifespan, which is countless times better than the nourishment of qi and blood. The snake demon glanced at the equally excited middle-aged man. Who would want to die if they didn't have to? And it was at this moment when they were reunited with their family. Although Zhang Yao had turned into an undead creature, he still had his own intelligence. Except for the lack of vitality, he didn't look much different from ordinary people. Besides, in the snake demon's view, his daughter was back. This was a great time for family reunion. Who would want a happy event to turn into a funeral? Zhang Yao hurriedly said, Madam, come on, open your mouth. Han Fei didn't know what to call the reincarnation of the water fairy. At this moment, she looked blank. Was it because she was born cold or because she hadn't awakened her memories? However, Han Fei guessed that before she entered the Tao, she probably wouldn't awaken the water fairy's memories. Since the water fairy had already thought of using this method to live another life, she must have thought of the problem of entering the Tao. If she still entered the previous Tao, then it would be meaningless to be reborn. The green snake's vitality was rapidly recovering. Her skin was no longer old, her hair was no longer withered and yellow, and her strength was also returning. The surrounding spiritual energy and energy were crazily drilling into the snake demon's body. It only took about 200 seconds for the snake demon to turn into a beautiful, plump, half-human, half-snake demon. Besides, as soon as she recovered, her strength was maintained at the beginning of the Tao-seeking state. Because she didn't come in directly from the outside world, the demon's suppressing pagoda wouldn't throw her into the 3rd floor. Zhang Yao hurriedly asked, Qingyang, how is it? The snake demon was overjoyed and hurriedly cupped her hands at Han Fei. Then, a green light flashed in her hand, and she reached for her chest. The green light bloomed, and a white lotus appeared in midair. The snake demon said, Benefactor. It was this white lotus that drilled into my body and gave birth to the girl. It was also this white lotus that took almost all of my vitality. It was this white lotus that managed to keep me alive until now. Han Fei's eyes lit up. This was definitely a small part of the water fairy's original body. He had seen it more than once. When the white snake and the reincarnation of the water fairy saw this white lotus, they were both shocked. They had an impulse to grab this white lotus. After all, this was the original body of the water fairy. Therefore, this kind of impulse was innate. However, Han Fei certainly couldn't give it to them. Otherwise, the reincarnation of the water fairy would still enter the wrong Tao. When they almost couldn't control themselves and were about to take action, they saw Han Fei reach out and grab the white lotus. Han Fei let out a long breath. Phew! Found it. Chapter 1294. When Han Fei grabbed the white lotus, he felt that the petals of the lotus in Forge the Universe were shivering. Han Fei wanted to store the white lotus in Forge the Universe, but as soon as he thought of this, the massive amount of spiritual energy in Forge the Universe evaporated in an instant, which scared the fish dragon king. The old turtle also hurriedly said, "You can't. It's alive." Han Fei hurriedly gave up this idea. But even so, he had wasted nearly 100,000 caddies of spiritual spring. It was a pity. However, it was exactly because this white lotus was alive. So, at the moment when Han Fei was about to collect it, the surrounding space shook as if there was an earthquake. Seeing that everyone was looking at him, Han Fei pretended to be calm. The white lotus changed owners and the void trembled. "It's nothing." The snake demon couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. She had 100 more years of vitality, and her spirit was back. At this moment, she thanked Han Fei again. "Thank you very much, benefactor." Han Fei smiled and shook his head. "If you knew that your daughter was the reincarnation of a king, what would you think?" The girl couldn't help but ask, "Father, mother, why is my surname Bai?" It seemed that she had been holding back for a long time, and she finally asked this question. Of course, when she asked this question, she looked at the white lotus in Han Fei's hand. This question made the snake demon and the middle-aged man look at each other in bewilderment. "Surname Bai?" The snake demon was surprised. "Girl, when you were born, we didn't have time to name you. At that time, you didn't know much about the world. How could your surname be Bai?" After that, they all looked at the white lotus in Han Fei's hand. Han Fei said calmly, "The world-shaking white lotus is a natural spiritual treasure, an ultimate treasure bred from the chaos of heaven and earth. Miss Bai has been protected by the white lotus since she was a child, so she could survive in the demon-subduing tower and inherit some of the power of the white lotus. Therefore, she feels that her surname is Bai, which is also destined and natural." The woman surnamed Bai and the white snake were both slightly stunned. Is that really the case? Han Fei was sure that the reincarnation of the water deity was too naive and didn't know how to distinguish the truth from the falsehood. As for Zhang Yao and the snake demon, although they were not weak, they knew very little about the power of the water fairy or the treasures of the heaven and earth spiritual treasure level. They would not be able to withstand his deception. Han Fei said, "If I'm not mistaken, the original body of the white lotus may be in this demon's sealing tower. Otherwise, such a good thing wouldn't have happened to you. Now that you and the world-shaking white lotus are connected by karma, I think it's better for Miss Bai to have the surname Bai. After all, the white lotus will protect her." Han Fei tried his best to bluff her, thinking, Shui Xian was originally a white lotus, don't reincarnate and change her surname to Zhang. When she regained her memories in the future, wouldn't she beat him up? The snake demon's expression froze. Benefactor's words make sense. "Little girl, do you have any inherited secret techniques?" The water immortal's reincarnation frowned slightly. She raised her hand and spiritual herbs gushed out like a waterfall. Seeing this scene, the snake demon and the middle-aged man looked at each other. Sure enough, as Han Fei said, their daughter had inherited some of the power of the world-shocking white lotus. This was a little too miraculous. The middle-aged man couldn't help but ask, "What is my son's name?" The water immortal's reincarnation shook her head slightly. "No name." The middle-aged man was stunned for a moment. When he was about to speak, his arm was tugged. It was the snake demon who pulled his sleeve. The snake demon said, "Thank you for bringing the girl here, benefactor. If I'm not mistaken, the girl hasn't entered the Tao or reached the peak. Moreover, Benefactor had entered this level as an intermediate explorer. This must be your means, right? The middle-aged man nodded slightly. Sorry, I overlooked it. The snake demon smiled lightly. Why don't you give the girl a name? Girl, what do you think? Although he didn't know why, the water immortal's reincarnation nodded slightly as if she trusted Han Fei. Han Fei's mouth twitched. Another name? However, she wouldn't dislike the name he gave her, would she? Even if she didn't like it, there was nothing she could do. This was karma. Who told your reincarnation to meet me? Han Fei paced slightly and thought to himself, no matter how good the name is, I have to brag about it first. She wants to beat me in the future. Remember, before I named her, I praised her for a long time. Han Fei said, when I first saw you, Miss Bai, I felt that you were extraordinary. You're gorgeous and elegant, with bright eyes and smooth skin. Miss Bai, it's as if you're the embodiment of beauty, elegance, and nobility in the world. You are really an extremely beautiful woman that is rare in the world. Han Fei's face was not red, and his heart did not beat fast. Everyone was dumbfounded by his words. Even the white snake shivered when she heard it. The snake demon even secretly said to Zhang Yao via voice transmission, Darling, has the benefactor fallen in love with our girl? Han Fei's heart skipped a beat. Sister, don't talk nonsense. If my teacher recovers, he will slap me to death. Han Fei quickly put on a serious face and said, so, I think it's good to name her Bai Suzhen. Bai is the surname of the world-shaking white lotus. Su is colorless and can also be called white. Zhen means chastity and purity and can also be called white. So, it's really a good name. The corner of Zhang Yao's mouth twitched slightly. It's indeed a good name. The snake demon nodded. Benefactor is really extraordinary. It's indeed a good name. Han Fei glanced at the reincarnation of the water deity. She and Bai Ling were looking at him. Han Fei wondered why Bai Ling wasn't a green snake. That would be perfect. Bai Suzhen and Little Qing would be perfect. If a man named Su Xian appeared in the future, he would be able to act in the legend of the white snake. Sure enough, the reincarnation of the water deity nodded gently as if she liked the name. Even her eyebrows relaxed a little. Her life had been extended, and she had a name. Han Fei didn't want to watch the family drama. He hurriedly said, well, Senior Zhang Yao, do you know how to leave the demon ceiling tower? Zhang Yao was slightly surprised. Huh? Benefactor, you don't have a way out? Han Fei didn't answer directly but said, I came in from the trial's secret realm in the White Shell Royal City. If I go out from there, I'll be in danger of being discovered. Is there any other way to leave the demon ceiling tower? Zhang Yao put on a bitter smile. To be honest, I really don't know how many floors there are in the demon ceiling tower. I only know that it's very dangerous here, but I've never found a way to leave. Now that I've woken up and my strength has returned, I may be restricted by the rules and have to enter the next floor. Han Fei asked in surprise, is there such a rule? Zhang Yao nodded slightly. It's not impossible to stay on this floor. However, bad luck will happen. A chaotic void will appear in the tower, allowing powerful enemies to attack and forcing me to go to the next floor. This should be a way for the demon ceiling tower to maintain its own balance. Han Fei had never heard that the demon ceiling tower had such a magical function. A chaotic void would appear. Therefore, the strong couldn't stay on the weak floor, and the weak could stay on the strong floor. After all, the weak couldn't break the balance. Bai Suzhen frowned slightly. Is it dangerous? The middle-aged man shook his head slightly. Girl, don't worry. I'm a peerless heavenly talent. I severed my own cultivation to come here before. What's the harm in doing it again? The snake demon couldn't help but stiffen. Yao, Zhang Yao relaxed. Qingyang, don't worry. I'll be back soon. Han Fei, on the other hand, was thinking about something in his head. Chaotic void? How should he use the white lotus in his hand? If he guessed correctly, it was part of the water fairy's true body. Otherwise, it couldn't have been so powerful to prolong a person's life for so long. Also, the demon purification pot couldn't see through any information about the white lotus, which meant that the level of the white lotus was much higher than he had imagined. If the water fairy's true body was really on the bottom floor, he couldn't go down either. Even if he could defeat the half-venerable creatures, he couldn't defeat the venerable creatures. While Zhang Yao and his family were sighing, Han Fei suddenly interjected, "Wait. Senior Zhang Yao, you stay here for now. I feel that I can explore this white lotus first. If you can hold it for a few days, I can try and see if I can find a way to leave." If it was an irrelevant stranger, even if this Zhang Yao was a human, Han Fei wouldn't help him. In this world, there was no such thing as crying when people from the same hometown met each other. There were tens of thousands of races in the world. He couldn't help them just because they were all human, right? However, this person was the father of the water fairy's reincarnation after all. The cause and effect relationship was not small at all. Different from the father he met after he traveled through the river of time, this person was his biological father. Besides, if this Zhang Yao went to other floors, it wouldn't be easy for the snake demon to survive before it fully recovered its strength. After all, most of the creatures on this floor were peak-level Tao-seeking creatures who had entered the Tao. After all, the water fairy hadn't entered the Tao or awakened her power. It might be fine to face 1 or 2 of them. She might be able to fight 3 or 4 of them. But if there were 10 or 8 peak-level Tao-seeking great demons, it wouldn't be easy. Even he had hunted peak-level Tao-seeking experts in the outside world. However, the outside world was different from the demon's ceiling tower. In the outside world, peak-level Tao-seeking experts didn't necessarily mean that they had entered the Tao. However, in the demon's ceiling tower, the ratio might be very high. Besides, when he hunted peak-level Tao-seeking experts, it was mostly because he launched a sneak attack and then cooperated with the old turtle to kill them. It wasn't a head-on confrontation. Thinking of this, Han Fei felt that for the safety of his teacher, this white lotus must be the key. Chapter 1295. Since the water fairy had already begun to plan and even separated a part of her body, she must be preparing for her rise again. Now that the white lotus was in Han Fei's hands, did it mean that he could contact the water fairy through part of her body? With a thought from Han Fei, Yuan Dao appeared, which startled Zhang Yao and the snake monster. Zhang Yao said in surprise, "A semi-venerable." "No. Is this a puppet?" Han Fei nodded and said, "Senior, please protect me." Bam! 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 Under Han Fei's feet, a series of small arrays emerged one after another. Soon, a white mist completely engulfed the space he was in. With Han Fei's current attainments in arrays, even if the opponent had reached the peak of Tao-seeking, she couldn't see through his arrays. In the array, Han Fei transmitted his spiritual power into the white lotus and said, "Master, Master. Can you hear me, Master?" The old turtle said, "It's useless to call her like this. Obviously, it wasn't easy for your master to separate this lotus. It has been separated from her body. How can it work if you call her body through it?" Han Fei frowned. Is there no connection between them after they are separated? Demon plants are a very special kind of creature, and they are always inextricably linked to each other. Otherwise, how could the rootless lotus extend the snake demon's life for so long? The old turtle said leisurely, "Maybe some of the roots are separated too." Han Fei frowned. He remembered what the water fairy once said to him. The roots of demon plants were like the souls of human beings. It was possible to separate the roots, but it would inevitably lead to a decline in strength. The water fairy was in the demon subduing tower, and the king of the Baibei royal city was just outside. Once the water fairy rashly separated the roots, her strength would be reduced, and the king might take advantage of her. The water fairy couldn't have thought of what he could think of. What the old turtle said was not unreasonable. What if the water fairy separated very few roots? However, even if the water fairy separated the roots, it meant that she also separated part of her soul. And this part of her soul was definitely not connected to the soul of her main body suppressed at the bottom of the demon-subduing tower. Otherwise, if the water fairy found out that he was here, she would definitely make a move. Han Fei couldn't help but take out the lotus petal from Forge the Universe. If he were to directly summon them through the White Lotus, he might be restricted by certain conditions. However, what if he activated it with the petal? Buzz, buzz, buzz. However, the moment this lotus petal appeared, the White Lotus trembled and actually began to spin on its own. There's hope. Han Fei's eyes lit up. A lotus leaf that could protect the water fairy for 80,000 years couldn't be that simple. The demon-subduing pagoda was here, which meant that the water immortal should be within 10,000 miles of him. Now that he had seen a part of the water immortal's body, would the real body be far away? Moreover, the water immortal's body and soul were both in a deep slumber in the past. However, things were different now. Now, the water immortal's divine soul had awakened. Since the lotus leaf could sense her, she should be able to sense the lotus leaf as well. Since they could sense each other, why would they need to find each other by themselves? It was not a bad idea to wait for Water Immortal to find him. However, the old turtle poured cold water on him again. Han Fei, don't forget that this place is called the Demon-Subduing Tower. I'm afraid that the teleportation barrier on each floor is different. You can break the array to the 4th floor, but it doesn't mean that you can break it all the way. The same is true for your master. Since she has been suppressed, it means that she can't cross the barriers. Han Fei said grumpily, what are you talking about? I don't see any decent ideas. The old turtle snorted. I'm teaching you. Everything needs to be considered carefully. The lotus petals were flickering, and the white lotus was spinning. Han Fei felt the void tremble several times, but it didn't work. The lotus petals just trembled for a moment, and then nothing happened. Immediately, Han Fei's heart sank. As the old turtle said, the water fairy couldn't come over. Wait. Han Fei's eyes suddenly lit up. Hadn't Zhang Yao been sealing and suppressing his strength? If he no longer sealed and suppressed himself, he might face the chaotic void. Once the void cracked, it meant that at least 1 or 2 layers of barriers would be broken. Taking advantage of that moment, the water fairy would definitely seize this opportunity. While Han Fei was thinking, the old turtle said leisurely, that's possible, but even if the seal is fully opened, this person can only reach the 6th floor at most. It's still unknown whether your master can cross over or not. Han Fei's eyes flickered. This is the most likely way I can think of. Otherwise, I don't know if I will have a chance to come to this demon-subduing tower again next time. At this moment, Han Fei chose to gamble that the water fairy's body could seize the opportunity to cross the barrier. Outside, Zhang Yao was still struggling to suppress his strength. The snake demon held by Suzhen with one hand and didn't dare to disturb Zhang Yao. Zhang Yao said solemnly, Suzhen, I will go to the next floor eventually. You have great luck, so your strength must be extraordinary. However, your mother's strength hasn't recovered yet, and she still needs your protection. Wait for me to come back. Bai Suzhen asked, are you going to lower your strength again? Zhang Yao smiled bitterly. This place can only be entered but not exited. There's nothing I can do. But if you have great luck, you may have a chance in the future. Bam! The mist was broken, Han Fei stepped out, and his eyes fell on Zhang Yao. Han Fei said, Senior, if you no longer suppress your strength, which will cause the chaotic void to appear, then I want to completely release your strength. Huh? Bai Suzhen frowned. It's dangerous. The snake demon asked, Benefactor? Zhang Yao was very calm. As a person who could get the venerable Jing messenger token and a peerless heavenly talent favored by the queen, he certainly had his reasons for doing this. Zhang Yao said calmly, okay. When? Han Fei was quite surprised that Zhang Yao agreed without even asking. Han Fei grinned. Senior, you're so generous. I can't go out either, but I need to take a gamble. If I win, I may have a chance to go out. As soon as Han Fei said this, everyone, including Bai Suzhen, trembled slightly. Zhang Yao said in a low voice, understood. Of course, Han Fei didn't immediately let Zhang Yao release all his strength, but waited for the family to get to know each other for a day. And he closed his eyes to feel his Tao seed. One day later. The 800-kilometer quicksand shook 3 or 4 times. In Han Fei's perception, there were creatures appearing on the edge of this sea of sand. Under the gaze of the snake demon and Bai Suzhen, Han Fei and Zhang Yao looked at each other. Han Fei said, "We can start now." Zhang Yao asked solemnly, "Han Fei, are you sure you want to enter the chaotic void?" Han Fei immediately nodded. "Don't worry. I know what I'm doing." Zhang Yao nodded solemnly and shouted, "Qingyang, Suzhen, step back." Hum, crack, crack, crack on the surface of Zhang Yao's body, bloody chains appeared one after another. Han Fei could tell at a glance that it was a kind of array. This Zhang Yao had actually used his blood essence to seal him, forcefully sealing him away. At this moment, the bloody chains were broken one by one, and Zhang Yao's aura soared as if he were riding a rocket. Bam! In only about 5 minutes, Zhang Yao had reached the level of a semi-venerable. His strength was still rising. Zhang Yao roared, "Han Fei, if you want, I can enter the Tao. My Tao is fine. I've already entered it once. This time, I'm just returning to it." Han Fei's eyes lit up. It would be even better if he could enter the venerable realm, which meant that he could break 2 barriers this time. Han Fei roared, "Enter." Huh! A terrifying power swept hundreds of kilometers. However, this force avoided Bai Suzhen and the snake demon very well. Han Fei perceived that many creatures had appeared around the sea of sand. Zhang Yao roared, "Anyone who enters the 800-kilometer quicksand will die." Then, Zhang Yao threw out an array that enveloped the sea of sand. In the next moment, Han Fei felt that the space was unstable, and there were abnormal fluctuations. It seemed that a creature was trying to crawl in from the void. Zhang Yao stepped out and roared again, "Open." The void cracked, and a starfish stretched out its long tentacles, trying to tear the void apart and crawl in. Zhang Yao grabbed at the void with both hands, as if he had grabbed dozens of bowstrings, pulled the bow, and shot it. At the same time, he roared, "Han Fei, I'll take it away. The rest is up to you." At the moment Zhang Yao stepped into the void, Han Fei activated his secret method and the Beast King art. He even used his power of the Great Path. His strength had already surpassed 1,000 waves. At this moment, Han Fei followed Zhang Yao closely and stepped into the void, holding the white lotus in one hand and the lotus leaf in the other. The two of them entered the chaotic void and went their separate ways. This was a chaotic void, which shouldn't appear on the 4th floor of the demon-suppressing tower. And Han Fei's strength was different from Zhang Yao's. Even if Han Fei went all out, he could only reach the semi-venerable realm. It was impossible for him to reach the venerable realm. However, at this moment, the void was about to be closed, and Han Fei heard a surprised voice. "You came so soon." First update. Asking for votes, end of this chapter. Chapter 1296. Yes, Han Fei was right. He had just broken through the void barrier with Zhang Yao's help, and then he heard the water fairy's voice. This meant that the water fairy had known that he was coming. It was just that they couldn't cross the spatial barrier and directly pass through it. Even though Han Fei heard the water fairy's voice, he didn't see where she was. The water fairy said quickly, "Drop the white lotus in your hand." Han Fei immediately let go of the white lotus. The white lotus quickly drilled out of the void crack, turned into a shadow, and disappeared between Bai Suzhen's eyebrows. It was so fast that Bai Suzhen didn't even have time to react. Han Fei was also stunned. It seemed that the white lotus had nothing to do with the water fairy's re-entry. Otherwise, the water fairy wouldn't have done this. The moment the white lotus disappeared, the water fairy shouted, "Crush the lotus leaf." Han Fei didn't dare to waste any time. God knew where the disordered void would take him. Since the water fairy said crush it, he would crush it himself. The moment the lotus leaf was broken, it turned into a phantom lotus seat and fell under Han Fei's feet. Bam! 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 As if it had been hit many times, a large crack appeared on the white phantom shield of the lotus seat with every explosion. After 4 violent collisions in a row, Han Fei felt that the lotus seat under his feet could be broken at any time. Han Fei thought, this is the power that can protect the water fairy for 10,000 years. How could it be broken so easily? However, it was different from what Han Fei had expected. The lotus seat seemed to be full of cracks, but it didn't really break. During this period, Han Fei saw a terrifying giant mouth open as if it wanted to swallow him. He even saw a long whip trying to tear open the void and drag him out of it. Han Fei even saw a webbed palm reach into the void and slap the lotus seat, making it tilt. Fortunately, the lotus seat emitted a white light and withstood the blow. Then Han Fei saw a white light appear in the void, which seemed to have been broken from the outside. Han Fei breathed a sigh of relief. This should be the exit. The water fairy had forcefully brought him from the 4th level to the level she was at. When the lotus throne emerged from the void, Han Fei's eyes didn't suddenly light up, but directly disappeared into a sea of spiritual plants. At least, Han Fei's perception covered thousands of kilometers. Countless white lotuses almost covered the entire range of his perception. Of course, seeing this scene, Han Fei didn't panic at all. So what if there was a white lotus here? This was his teacher's main body, and it wouldn't hurt him. Therefore, even though the white lotus was terrifying and each of its vines was extremely flexible and tough, a few of them could easily whip Han Fei to death. However, Han Fei didn't panic at all. On the contrary, Han Fei was very relaxed. He scanned the area with his perception and asked, "Sir, where are you?" However, a voice shook the world. "How did you get here so quickly?" I said within 100 years. It's only been a few months. Han Fei curled his lips and said, "Speed is the most important thing in war. Teacher, you don't know, but there are still many things waiting for me to do. So, it's impossible to wait for 100 years. The water fairy said angrily, "Who were you with just now? Why did I feel my own aura?" Han Fei said in surprise, "Huh? Sir, are you sure you don't know?" The water fairy was puzzled. "What do I know? I've only been awake for a few months. Now I can only feel your existence, but I haven't broken the shackles of my main body yet, so I can only feel that you're here." Han Fei immediately told the water fairy about Bai Suzhen. The water fairy was stunned for a long time, and then her voice slowly became solemn. "No wonder I couldn't establish a connection with my main body after trying for a few months. I'm afraid that my body has given birth to a new consciousness." "Huh?" Han Fei shivered all over and hurriedly said, "Sir, don't scare me. I can't defeat a king-level powerhouse now." The water fairy said, "It shouldn't be a big problem. Before I fell asleep, I had already sealed the Tao of my main body. The newly born spiritual consciousness couldn't completely control my main body. I don't know how long it took for me to separate a part of my main body and come back through reincarnation." Han Fei immediately took a breath. "Huh? So, Bai Suzhen is not your reincarnation, sir?" The water fairy said, "Yes and no. In fact, I didn't figure out why part of myself was outside just now. Do you know why I asked you to let go of that white lotus? Because that white lotus was no longer under my control. I was afraid that part of my main body would be controlled by others. If I brought it back, it would definitely stop you." Han Fei was puzzled. "What about Bai Suzhen?" The water fairy said, "It's the new spiritual consciousness that found a reborn body for itself. It has been living in the body of the snake demon you mentioned, not to prolong the snake demon's life, but to wait for its reincarnation to come back. In this way, when the two are combined, it can live in the reincarnation body and completely control its new body." Han Fei immediately said, "Not good. Then hasn't she succeeded now?" The water fairy said, "No, I still can't control my main body, which means that its spiritual consciousness hasn't completely arrived in by Sujin's body. Be careful. The old turtle warned in his heart. Han Fei directly teleported himself away with the star's transposition. Fuse. Gemini Divine Technique. Han Fei didn't dare to be careless at all. When he learned that a new consciousness had been born in the water fairy's main body, he already felt a little uncomfortable. Now, when he guessed that there was still a new consciousness here, Han Fei was scared. That was a king-level creature. Even if it only had a little bit of a new consciousness, even if it could only use a little bit of its main body's power, it was still not something that Han Fei could defeat. At the moment when Han Fei flashed away, the place where he was just now had been pierced by countless vines. Therefore, at the moment when he appeared, Han Fei chose to use the Gemini Divine Technique. In order to prevent the other party from attacking him at lightning speed, the infinity water condensed into a bubble and directly wrapped itself. Sure enough, in the next moment, tens of millions of vine thorns instantly squeezed the infinity water to the point that it was about to burst. Explode. Before the infinity water was crushed, Han Fei directly chose to explode himself. Huh! Han Fei roared and the 100 beasts' soul suppression roar burst out. In an instant, hundreds of beasts soared into the sky and roared again and again. Rumble, while the infinity water was exploding, Han Fei directly stepped out of the Great Plate Turtle Array and waved his hand, and dozens of fish skin maps appeared, all of which were Great Plate Turtle Arrays. The old turtle roared, come on, hide in here. Han Fei thought to himself, I don't have time to hide. In the second, Han Fei saw that a huge number of vines came at him again. The time to enter Forge the Universe had never changed, and it would take nearly 3 seconds to enter. Bam. Before the second passed, Han Fei saw that his Great Plate Turtle Array was instantly shattered like a piece of paper. Seeing that the situation was not good, Han Fei's body of white mist directly wrapped the black mist in the middle. Ice. As the white mist dispersed, these vines whipped again and directly scattered Han Fei. However, at that moment, Han Fei didn't feel the so-called pain. Because he was mist himself. Besides, when the white mist dispersed, the black mist might not have been noticed because it was too dark, so it escaped the disaster. After all, in the eyes of outsiders, Little Black couldn't be seen. It was true that the water fairy was a king, but it didn't mean that her newly born consciousness was also a king. Otherwise, if a consciousness was born as soon as it was born, how could he fight? He would have been killed long ago, and the other party wouldn't have given him time to react at all. Come back. The white mist was shaken away, and Han Fei could only send half of himself into Forge the Universe. Who? The white mist dissipated again, and Han Fei really felt as if he was panting. While the vines couldn't do anything to him, the black mist Han Fei turned into a human form and forged the universe and called out Little Fatty. At this moment, Han Fei felt very strange. Half of him was in Forge the Universe, and the other half was outside. At this moment, the vision of the two could be shared. Han Fei shouted, Master, your king-level soul shouldn't be suppressed by a new consciousness, right? The water fairy didn't respond, but the old turtle did. Pay attention to protect the soul. Your teacher has been in a deep slumber for too long. It's not impossible to seal your teacher's soul for a very long time. Unless you find this seal and break it. Hearing this, Han Fei quickly condensed the white mist. He didn't dare to use his perception, for fear of being torn apart. Han Fei only used Little White's talent ability to sense. Fortunately, Little White's ability was not bad. Even if a king was next to it, it still couldn't block its perception of the surroundings. Therefore, Han Fei soon found the place that the old turtle said was sealed by a formation. Agility of wind. The sealed place was only a little more than 1,000 kilometers away from him. With his speed, it would only take less than 2 seconds. In the white mist, a pair of phantom-like wings stretched out. After flying less than 500 kilometers, Han Fei felt that his soul was collapsing. The terrifying impact of the divine soul instantly defeated him. However, the white mist only stopped moving for a while, and Han Fei felt that his consciousness returned. At the moment when his consciousness returned, Han Fei realized that the Gemini divine technique still followed the characteristics of the twin yin-yang spirit-swallowing fish. If one side didn't die, the other side wouldn't perish. In this way, Han Fei was overjoyed. This time, he rushed to the sealed place without any scruples. Second. Asking for votes, end of this chapter.